There is an image the two shows keep returning to, a long line of figures standing behind whoever the avatar happens to be, each one an avatar who lived and died before them. And the line runs back so far that after the first few, the faces dissolve into shapes and then into shadow. Thousands of lives, one soul handed forward for 10,000 years, and here's the strange part. Out of all of them, only about 10 are ever actually named. The rest are silhouettes, strangers who each carried the same spirit and gave it away. Tonight we are going to walk the whole cycle, from the very first avatar to the one still living. Every single one canon actually lets us know, in the order they were born into. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low. This is Ember, we will be here a while. And if you have not subscribed yet, it genuinely does help us keep making these. Start at the beginning, which in this world is a very specific beginning because the avatar has not always existed. There was a first one and his name was Wan, and if you have only ever watched The Last Airbender, you may never have met him at all, because his whole story lives inside the Legend of Korra, in a two-part episode in the second book called Beginnings. It is framed in a way that is worth pausing on. Korra, in that stretch of the series, has lost her memories, and she relearns who she is by reliving the story of the very first avatar. So the audience meets Wan exactly the way Korra does from the inside, as if remembering something that happened to them a very long time ago. Both parts aired in the autumn of 2013, and Wan is voiced by Steven Yeun, which is one of those small casting facts that sticks with you once you know it. The world Wan is born into does not look like the world you know from either show. There are no nations yet, no benders in the way we think of them, no avatar. Humans and spirits share the world, but it is the spirits who dominate it, and the wilderness between the settlements is called the spirit wilds, and a human who wanders out into it usually does not come back. So people do not live on the land the way we do. They live crowded together on the backs and shells of enormous creatures called lion turtles. Whole cities carried on the shoulders of a single beast, and outside those cities is a world that will kill you. This is the detail I keep coming back to because it reframes everything that bending eventually becomes. In the beginning, humans could not bend at all. They were powerless. The only reason anyone could touch an element was that the lion turtles were the original benders. And when a person needed to leave the city to hunt in the wilds, the lion turtle would bend the energy inside that person and lend them one element, a single power, temporarily, and then take it back the moment they returned. You went out carrying fire that was not really yours, and you came home empty. That is where all of it starts. Not with a hero, with a lone. Wan is a commoner, a poor thief scraping by on the shell of a fire lion turtle, and the choice that makes him the first avatar is not a noble one. He takes the power of fire the way anyone would for a hunt, and then he refuses to give it back. He keeps it. And for that he is banished, sent out into the spirit wilds alone, carrying a stolen element into a place that swallows people. What happens next is the part the story turns on, because Wan does not die out there. He survives. He learns the wilds, he learns the spirits, he stops being afraid of them, and a great white dragon teaches him true firebending, the real art of it rather than the borrowed trick he ran off with. He becomes, out there in the wilderness, something no ordinary human was meant to be, a person who could hold an element and actually use it. And then he meets the two spirits. The whole cosmology hangs on. Rava, the spirit of light and peace and order, and Vatu, the spirit of darkness and chaos. And the thing you have to understand about these two is that they are not simply good and evil in the cartoon sense. They are counterparts. They are locked in a battle that never ends and is not supposed to end, each one the reason the other has meaning. And for 10,000 years before Wan ever showed up, Rava had been keeping Vatu in check, holding the balance by a thread. When Wan stumbles into their fight, Vatu is the one who talks to him, and Vatu is very good at talking. He tells Wan a version of events that casts Rava as the oppressor, and Wan, meaning to help, uses his fire to drive the two apart. And that is the catastrophe. Separating them does not free a prisoner. It unleashes Vatu, weakens Rava, and tips a balance that had held through that entire age, and Wan realizes almost immediately what he has done. I find this genuinely striking because think about what it means for the origin of the entire Avatar line. The first Avatar does not begin with a victory. He begins with a mistake so large it endangers the world, and everything he becomes afterward is an attempt to fix it. The Avatar, at its very root, is a redemption story. The most powerful being in this universe was born out of guilt. To undo what he had done, Wan needed to become strong enough to face Vaatu, and one element was never going to be enough. So he went to the other lion turtles, the ones who held the other elements, and one by one he took on air, then water, then earth. And here the story answers a question the shows otherwise just ask you to accept, which is why the Avatar, and only the Avatar, can bend all 4 elements when everyone else is limited to 1. The answer is Rava. A human body cannot hold 4 elements at once, so Rava carried the powers inside herself, storing each one until Wan had mastered it, letting him become the first person ever to wield fire and air and water and earth together. It was never really Wan alone, it was always the 2 of them. The bond becomes permanent during an event called harmonic convergence, a rare cosmic alignment that comes roughly once every 10,000 years, when the 2 worlds draw close and the spirit portals align. At that convergence, Wan and Rava fuse. Not a temporary possession, not a loan like the lion turtles gave, but a merging of a human soul and a spirit into a single being, a union the show describes as something not even death could part, and that fused being is the first Avatar. With Rava's power joined to his own, Wan finally has the strength to face Vaatu, and he wins. But he does not kill him because you cannot kill Vaatu any more than you can kill Rava. They are permanent. So instead, Wan imprisons him, sealing Vaatu inside one of the 2 spirit portals, the northern and the southern, the doors that connect the human world to the spirit world. And then Wan makes the decision that shapes the next 10,000 years. He guides the spirits back into their own world, and he closes both portals, sealing the 2 worlds apart from each other so that Vaatu stays locked away, and humans and spirits stop sharing the same ground. This is the moment the Avatar is given the title it will carry ever after, the bridge between 2 worlds, and it is a bittersweet title when you know how it started, because the bridge is also the one who shut the door. With the worlds separated, the lion turtles decide their long guardianship is over. They stop lending humans the elements. And that is the quiet end of an age. The reason bending had to be relearned from other teachers later, from the badger moles and the dragons and the moon and the sky bison, because the original source simply stepped back and let go. Wan spent the rest of his life trying to bring peace between the humans who were now scattered across a world without spirits to fear. And he failed. The shows are honest about that. He grew old, he watched people keep fighting each other, and in his final moments he apologized to Rava for not being able to end human conflict in a single lifetime, and he promised that they would keep trying, together, again and again for as long as it took. And because Rava was bonded to his very soul, when Wan died, that bond did not die with him. The Avatar spirit passed on, reincarnating into a new person, a new nation, a new life, and the cycle that carries this entire franchise began. Every Avatar after him, all the way down to the one alive right now, is Wan's promise still being kept. The shows never tell us exactly how old he was when he died. He is drawn as an old man, weary, but they leave the number blank, and honestly, the blank feels right. He was the first. He did not get an ending so much as a handoff. That is where the line starts, and now we have to be honest about the shape of what comes next, because between Wan and the next Avatar anyone can actually name, thousands of years go by, and thousands of avatars live and die without ever being given a face. When you see that long line of figures stretching back into the dark, almost every one of them is a stranger. Not because the story forgot them, but because 10,000 years is simply too many lives for any story to hold. Only about 10 avatars across all of canon are truly named, and they are not consecutive. Great gaps of unnamed avatars sit between the ones we know. So as we move forward, keep that in mind. We are not walking an unbroken chain. We are lighting a handful of lamps along a road that mostly runs through the dark. And the first 2 lamps after Wan are so dim that even their basic details are a mystery. The 2 dimmest lamps belong to a pair of avatars named Gun and Salai, and I want to be careful about how I talk about them, because they are the clearest test of the one rule that matters most here, which is that if canon does not tell you something, you do not get to invent it. Both of these avatars come from a single novel, The Legacy of Yangchen, published in the summer of 2023, and they are unusual even among the barely known, because for both of them we do not know the nation, we do not know the element, and we do not even know for certain whether they were a man or a woman. The sources that discuss them simply use they and them, because that is all the story gives. If you go looking online, you will find pages that confidently assign them numbers in the cycle and family trees and specific water tribe ancestors, and I need to say this plainly, all of that comes from a fan-made project, not from canon, and we are leaving it out. What the actual books give us is small and sad and worth sitting with. Start with Gun, because Gun comes first in the cycle, the direct predecessor of Salai. We meet Gun the way we meet almost everything in these stories, secondhand, through someone else's spiritual memory. In the novel, Yangchen, as a girl of only 8 years old, spiritually relives one of Gun's memories, and the memory she is given is not a triumph. It is a failure and one of the worst of Gun's life. A tsunami, a great flood, bearing down on a harbor city called Ha'an, and Gun, the avatar, the being who was supposed to be able to move the sea itself, could not stop it. The city was destroyed, and in that flood, Gun lost someone, a companion named Missos, a poet and engineer who went by the nickname Sesi, and Sesi drowned. This was one of the great failures of Gun's life, the kind of thing that does not scar over cleanly. And afterward, Gun stepped back from the duties of the Avatar entirely, took a long sabbatical from the role, the way a person walks away from a job that has cost them too much. That is nearly the whole of what we are told about Gun, an Avatar defined in the only memory we are given by the day the water won. And then there is Salai, Gun's direct successor. And Salai is fascinating precisely because of how little we get and how much that little implies. Canon tells us exactly one thing about Salai, that Salai is recorded as one of the greatest avatars who ever lived. That is it, one of the greatest ever, and it never tells us why. There is no signature deed, no famous war ended, no monster slain, no city saved that we can point to and say, that is why they remember Salai. The reputation is there in the record with the reasons torn out. And I find that pairing almost unbearably good as a piece of writing, because look at what the novel does by placing them side by side. Gun, remembered for a failure so total that the Avatar walked away from the job. Salai, remembered as one of the greatest to ever hold it, for reasons no one bothered to write down. Two people who carried the same spirit, one after the other, and history kept the wrong details about both of them. It kept Gun's worst day and lost the story of why Salai was so beloved. That is, I think, the real reason these two exist in the story at all, and why a novel about Yangchen bothers to reach back and name them when it could have left them as silhouettes like everyone else. They are an argument about the Avatar's relationship to memory. You do not get to choose how you are remembered. You do your best across a lifetime and then you die. And the record keeps whatever it keeps, sometimes the failure, sometimes the reputation with none of the substance underneath it. And the next Avatar inherits your name in that half-remembered form and has to make peace with it. Yangchen, remember, is a child when she relives Gun's flood, and it lands on her as a warning, a glimpse of how badly it can go and how little control you have over the version of you that outlasts you, so we cannot tell you their nations. We cannot tell you their elements. We cannot even tell you a hard date, only that they lived somewhere in the long stretch before Yangchen, with an unknown number of unnamed avatars scattered between them and her, because I want to keep stressing this. The named ones are not a neat sequence. Gun and Salai are two lit windows in a very long, dark building, and the honest thing to do is tell you what is behind those two windows and admit that we cannot see into any of the others nearby. What we can do from here on is start reaching avatars the stories actually spent time with, and the first of those is a Fire Nation avatar who saved his entire nation without ever really being known as a fighter at all. His name is Szeto, and he is a Fire Nation avatar who lived several centuries before Aang, and I want to be upfront that we do not have precise dates for him. Canon does not give us the year he was born or the year he died. What it gives us instead is a portrait, and it is one of the strangest portraits in the whole cycle, because Szeto is the avatar who saved his nation with paperwork. His name was first revealed in one of the Kyoshi novels and then filled in across the books about Yangchen, and the picture that emerges is of a man who did not fit the image most people carry of what an avatar is supposed to be. Think about the avatars you already know. You picture power. You picture someone raising the sea or splitting the earth, or standing in a burning sky with their eyes glowing white. Szeto is the answer to a quiet question the franchise almost never asks, which is what happens when the crisis your nation faces cannot be punched. Because the Fire Nation in his era was not being invaded. It was collapsing from the inside. Plagues moving through the population, natural disasters, famine, and on top of all of it, violent conflict between the great clans. the kind of internal fracturing that could have split the Fire Nation into a scatter of small independent territories, each one ruled by whoever held the upper hand in that valley. That is a slow catastrophe, a rot, and you cannot end a rot by being the strongest bender in the room. So Szeto did something that I genuinely love. The more I think about it, he went to work. Not as a warrior, but as a bureaucrat. He served in the court of the Fire Lord of his day, a ruler named Yosor, and he rose through that court not by force but by competence, working as a diplomat, an administrator, and of all things, an accountant, until he reached the position of Grand Advisor, one of the highest offices a person could hold at the Fire Lord's side. Canon is firm on that title, Grand Advisor. You will sometimes see him called Grand Secretariat as well, and I will flag that one as uncertain because the sources are not settled on it, so we will stick with what we can stand behind. And from that chair, with ledgers and policy rather than fire, he saved the Fire Nation. The stories credit him with ending the debasement of the currency, the slow poisoning of the money supply that wrecks an economy from underneath, and with restoring economic balance to a nation that was sliding toward ruin. He is credited with establishing the first official programs of famine relief, an organized state response to hunger where before there had been none. Put those together, stable money and food reaching the people who were starving, and you have quite literally the machinery that holds a civilization together, built by the one person in it who had the authority and the patience to build it. He did not save the Fire Nation from a conqueror, he saved it from itself, from hunger and inflation and its own feuding nobles. And he did it at a desk. The measure of how much that meant is that they made a holiday out of him. There is a festival of Szeto in the Fire Nation, and by the accounts we have, it was a highly revered one, which lands with a particular weight when you remember what the Fire Nation eventually became. Because this is a nation that, by the time of Sozin and the 100-Year War, came to shun the very idea of the Avatar, to treat the Avatar as an enemy of Fire Nation greatness. And yet buried in their own calendar was a festival honoring an Avatar who had been one of the best things that ever happened to them. This is the detail that gets me about Szeto. His own people forgot, in a sense, that they had ever loved an Avatar because the politics of a later century made it convenient to forget. The Fire Nation that tried to end the Avatar for good once threw festivals in an Avatar's honor. Both of those are the same country. I think Szeto matters, in the shape of this whole story, as a corrective. It is easy, watching the shows, to build up an idea that the Avatar's job is fundamentally about combat, about being the one strong enough to stop the villain, and the finales all reinforce that because a finale needs a fight. Szeto is the reminder that most of the Avatar's real work across 10,000 years was almost certainly not that. It was harvests and treaties and the boring grinding maintenance of keeping societies from tearing themselves apart. Work that never makes a good climax and never gets a statue posed mid-strike. He held the balance of the world with a pen, and the world was every bit as saved as it would have been by a sword. Most of those unnamed silhouettes we talked about were probably far more like Szeto than like the ones who get the dramatic deaths. The Avatar who saved the greatest number of lives may well have been an accountant, and no one made an episode about him because there was nothing to animate. From Szeto, the Fire Nation Avatar, the cycle turns to air, and to an Avatar who is arguably the best regarded of all of them, a woman whose advice still echoes into Aang's story a lifetime later, and who spent her life proving that the gentlest nation could produce the hardest kind of pragmatist. Her name is Yangchen, and if you have watched The Last Airbender, you have heard her name spoken with a particular reverence, because among the air nomads she is close to a saint, and her respect reaches well beyond them across all 4 nations. She was born an air nomad, she came in the cycle after Szeto and before an Avatar named Kuruk, and she sits 4 avatars back from Aang with Roku and Kyoshi and Kuruk filling the space between them. And the thing that makes Yangchen so compelling, the thing that separates her from the image people carry of what an air nomad Avatar should be, is that she was not serene and detached. She was among the worldliest and most hard-nosed pragmatists the cycle ever produced. The air nomads, as a culture, prize detachment. They are the ones who teach that suffering comes from clinging, that the enlightened path is to let go of worldly attachments, to float above the mess of nations and politics and money and stay pure. And Yangchen looked at that ideal, the ideal of her own people, and effectively decided it was a luxury the Avatar could not afford. She rejected the notion that the Avatar should hold themselves apart from the world. She believed the exact opposite, that the avatar belongs to the world completely, that whatever peace of mind she might have wanted for herself came second to the concrete task of keeping people from dying. And she acted on that. She used espionage, she used diplomacy, she sat across the table from corrupt merchants and dirty officials and cut deals with them, dealt in leverage and information and compromise, because she understood that a war prevented in a back room is worth more than a war won on a battlefield. She got her hands dirty on purpose, and it worked, and she was revered for it. Among the air nomads, her festival became one of their very highest holy days, and across the nation she was broadly, deeply respected. Most of what fills in this picture comes from 2 novels by the author F.C. Yi, part of the same run of Avatar books, one released in 2022 and its sequel a year later, and they are worth describing because they show you Yangchen at work rather than just telling you she was wise. The books drop her into a place called Bin Air, an Earth Kingdom Shang city, a merchant city, effectively a city of spies, run by wealthy traders whose corruption has grown into something that threatens the balance of the whole region. This is Yangchen's natural habitat, the opposite of a monastery, a place of bribery and double agents and shifting loyalties. And she moves through it not as an untouchable holy figure, but as an operator. She gathers a circle of companions along the way, among them a northern water tribe waterbender named Kavik, who becomes something between a friend and a rival and a love interest. One of those relationships where the closeness and the danger are the same thing, because his betrayal becomes one of the sharpest turns in the story. The books are honest that Yangchen, for all her competence, can be used by the people she trusts, and that being the avatar does not make you immune to being hurt by someone you let in. There is a weapon at the center of these novels called unanimity, a device tied to combustion bending, that rare and terrifying fire-bending subskill that lets a person detonate things at a distance with their mind. And unanimity represents the possibility of that power scaled up into something that could unbalance the entire world, a weapon of mass destruction in a setting that mostly fights with fists and elements. Yangchen's fight is to keep that kind of power from being unleashed, and it is a very modern kind of story to hang on an ancient avatar. The avatar as the one person standing between the world and a weapon too large for it. She travels on a flying bison of her own named Nujian, and in the second book she loses Nujian, and the grief of that loss sits heavy on her, because these are not props to the people who ride them, they are companions, and an avatar who has lost her bison is carrying a specific wound. She keeps company across the books with figures named Tayagum and Akudan and Jujinta, and a pair called Pik and Pak, and somewhere in that stretch you get an early appearance of the Order of the White Lotus, the secret society of the wise that fans of the shows know from the old masters who subtly shape events from the margins. But the thing about Yangchen that reaches furthest, the thing that touches the main show directly, is a single conversation. When Aang, at the very end of his own series, is desperate trying to find a way to defeat Fire Lord Ozai without killing him, he goes to his past lives for guidance. And Yangchen is one of the avatars he consults in the episode Sozin's Comet, Part 2, The Old Masters. And her counsel to him is the opposite of comforting. She tells him that the avatar can never achieve the detachment her own people prize because his sole duty is to the world. She tells him that selfless duty calls on him to sacrifice his own spiritual needs and do whatever it takes to protect the world. Consider what she is asking of him. Aang wants permission to keep his hands clean, to stay true to the air nomad values he was raised in. And Yangchen, the most revered air nomad avatar of all, the one you would expect to bless that instinct, tells him no. She tells him the job is heavier than his own soul, and she can say it with authority because she lived it. Every deal she cut with a corrupt merchant, every secret she traded, every moment she spent in a spy city instead of a temple, was her paying exactly that price, giving up her own spiritual comfort so that people she would never meet could go on living. There is one more piece of Yangchen worth knowing, and it comes from the comics, specifically a graphic novel called The Rift, and it deepens this picture of her as the avatar who does the hard, unglamorous work of keeping peace. In this case, peace not between nations, but between humanity and the spirits. The comic establishes an ancient and enormous spirit called General Old Iron, who in ages past had wanted to destroy humanity outright, and who, after the death of his friend Lady Tianhai, turned toward vengeance against the humans. Yangchen faced him. The story tells us she battled him through the night until dawn, and then rather than simply beating him, she struck a deal. an agreement to preserve a piece of sacred land, to keep it untouched in exchange for peace. And because she knew she would not live forever to enforce it, she created a festival, Yangchen's festival, a ritual whose real purpose was to keep her pact alive after her death so that generations who never knew her would keep the promise she made. The tragedy in the rift is that centuries later, in Aang's time, people build a refinery on that sacred ground, breaking Yangchen's pact without even understanding what they are breaking. An old iron wakes, and it falls to Aang and Toph to face the consequences of a promise their predecessor made and their own era forgot. That is Yangchen in full, and it is why I would argue she shaped the cycle more quietly and more deeply than any avatar short of Wan himself. She figured out and passed on the hardest lesson the job contains, that the avatar does not get to be a good person in the small, private sense. She spent her death maintaining deals she had made in life. Her festivals were load-bearing. Her advice reshaped the ending of a series that took place hundreds of years after she died. She kept peace with spirits by treaty and kept peace with humans by espionage and asked nothing back except that the world go on. And the avatar who came right after her was, on the surface, her total opposite. A man everyone thought was lazy, and the truth of him is one of the saddest stories in all of Avatar. His name is Kuruk, and he was a waterbender of the Northern Water Tribe, born just after Yangchen died. And if you know him at all from the shows, it is probably as a disappointment. That is exactly how the world of Avatar remembers him. Kuruk has a reputation, and the reputation is that he was lazy. A carefree avatar, a go-with-the-flow man who let the world drift because he could not be bothered to hold it steady. An avatar whose slackness left the four nations quarreling and unbalanced. That is the story people tell about him. And it is one of the cruelest injustices in the whole franchise, because it is almost the exact opposite of the truth, and the truth was hidden on purpose. Hidden by Kuruk himself, and it cost him everything. Start with the surface, because even the surface is impressive if you look past the sneer. Kuruk was renowned as the greatest hunter in the history of the four nations. He was a masterful player of Pai Sho, the strategy game that runs like a thread through this whole world as a marker of a sharp mind. He carried himself with an easy, likable, unbothered charm. So already the lazy label does not quite fit, because the man was disciplined enough to be the finest hunter anyone had ever seen and clever enough to master a game of deep strategy. The carelessness was a performance. Underneath it, Kuruk was doing the deadliest work any avatar has ever taken on, and he was doing it alone. And he was doing it in secret so that no one would ever have to be afraid of what he knew. What was really happening underneath ran the other way. In Kuruk's era, dark spirits were slipping through the cracks between the human world and the spirit world, malevolent things bleeding into reality, and Kuruk hunted them. Not metaphorically, he tracked them down and he fought them, one after another, in the dark, where nobody could see. And he did it because he was the only one who could. And this is the part that turns his whole story from a slacker's tale into a tragedy. Because every single dark spirit he vanquished inflicted an injury on his own soul that never healed. Fighting them did not just tire him, it wounded him at the level of the spirit, drained his life force, took something from him each time that he could not get back. He was burning himself down to keep those things off of ordinary people, and he let the world believe he was lounging around doing nothing, because the alternative was to let them know how thin the wall between the worlds really was and how much it was costing to hold it up. He ended the worst of the incursions by weakening a powerful evil spirit called Father Glowworm, and the price of all of it came due early. Kuruk died at 33 years old. Say that next to the other numbers in this cycle and it lands hard. He is the youngest confirmed avatar death we have. A man who should have had decades left, worn down to nothing by soul-deep wounds before he reached the middle of an ordinary life. And because he died so young and so drained, having spent his energy on a secret war instead of on the visible duties of the avatar, the four nations really were left unsettled and quarrelsome after him, which is where the lazy reputation comes from. People saw the neglect and never knew the reason. They blamed him for resting when he was actually bleeding out from a fight they never saw. That is the injustice. The world called him idle while he died protecting it. And then there is the loss that sits at the very center of him, the one that even his soul wounds cannot match. And it involves a spirit whose name alone unsettles people who know this world. Ko, the face stealer. Kuruk was betrothed. Her name was Umi, and by the accounts we have, she came from the Southern Water Tribe. So the two of them bridged the north and the south, a marriage that meant something. And on what should have been the happiest occasion, Ko took her. The face stealer stole Ummi's face and dragged her down into the spirit world. And it was not random, it was aimed, a punishment directed at Kuruk himself, a way to wound the Avatar through the person he loved. And Kuruk wanted revenge. Of course he did. He wanted to kill Ko and get her back. But he could not, and the reason he could not is the cruelest turn in the whole thing. Ummi was not simply killed. She was bound within Ko, and to kill Ko would be to kill her too. So the one act of vengeance that might have satisfied his grief was the one act that would erase the last of her. He was trapped. He could not strike, and he could not save her, and he had to go on living, or what passed for living, carrying both. That grief reaches forward into the last Airbender in a small, quiet, devastating way. Aang, in his travels, encounters Ko, and among the faces Ko wears, he glimpses Ummi's, and he is able to carry word of it back to Kuruk. And Kuruk's response is not relief, and it is not peace. It is a vow. He tells Aang that he will keep hunting Ko, that even in death he is still searching, still trying to find a way to be reunited with her. Think about that. An avatar who has been dead for generations, who exists now only as a past life, a younger avatar can consult. And the thing that still animates him, the thing he is still doing in whatever way the dead do anything, is looking for the woman he loved. The soul wounds did not define his afterlife. Ummi did. Kuruk's story gets filled in mostly through the Kyoshi novels, told in flashback, because his death is what sets Kyoshi's era in motion. And the search for his successor pulls in a whole cast, people like Jianzhu and Kelsang and his firebending teacher He Ran, and a Bhanti sage named Nyahitha. His parents are never named in canon, and his weapon is worth one careful note, because fans love to embellish it. What canon gives him is a spirit-forged knife, a blade specially made to be able to harm spirit monsters because ordinary weapons simply pass through them. Not a set of shark tooth blades, not a matched pair of knives, whatever you may have read, a single spirit knife. And there is a popular fan theory that this very knife was later passed down and eventually used against the moon spirit in the north. But I want to be clear that this is a theory, an unconfirmed piece of fan connective tissue, not something canon states, so we file it under things fans like to imagine rather than things we know. What Kuruk leaves to the avatars who come after him is a warning, and it is the mirror image of Yangchen's. Yangchen taught Aang to give himself completely to the world. Kuruk teaches the opposite lesson from the other direction, the danger of passivity, the cost of letting things happen to you instead of shaping them. To Kyoshi, when she meets him as a past life, he drops the carefree mask entirely and shows her what he really was. And to Aang, he gives the advice that you must actively shape your own destiny, that you cannot drift and hope. And he gives that advice with terrible authority because his own inaction, his single failure to strike at the right moment, or his inability to, is what cost him Ummi. He is the avatar who learned too late that the world does not wait for you, and he spends his afterlife trying to spare the ones who follow from learning it the same way. And one of the ones who followed was the longest-lived, most physically imposing, most morally uncompromising avatar the cycle ever produced. A woman who made very sure the world never mistook her for passive. Her name is Kyoshi, and almost everything about her is the largest version of itself. She is the longest-lived avatar we know of by an enormous margin. She was, by reputation, the tallest, an imposing physical presence in a way no other avatar quite is. Her sense of justice was the hardest, the least willing to bend, and she left behind the longest-lasting institutions of any avatar short of the founding acts of Wan himself. When people argue about who the single most formidable avatar was, Kyoshi is nearly always in the conversation, and she earned that the hard way because her origin is not a story of a chosen child raised in comfort. It is a story of an orphan who was told she was nobody, who watched someone else be crowned the avatar in her place, and who had to claw her way into her own identity through betrayal and murder. Let us start with the number that defines her because it is quite staggering. Kyoshi lived to 230 years old. 230. She is the oldest confirmed human being in the entire franchise, and the longest-lived avatar in the cycle by a wide gap. Put her next to Kuruk, who died at 33, and you have almost the whole emotional range of the avatar's burden in 2 consecutive lives. One worn to death before middle age, the next living 7 times as long. The in-universe reason for her longevity is itself a little sinister. She learned techniques of life extension from an immortal assassin named Lao Ge, a man who had, by his own account, kept himself alive across an unnatural span of years, and who taught her something of how he did it. So Kyoshi's incredible lifespan is not simply a gift of health, it is knowledge she took from a killer, which is very on brand for her because Kyoshi was never squeamish about where a useful thing came from. Her story is told in 2 novels by F.C. Yi, developed together with Michael Dante DiMartino, one of the original creators of the show, which is part of why they carry real canonical weight. The first came out in 2019 and the second the following year, and together they rebuild Kyoshi from the legend the animated series gave us into a full and complicated person. And what they reveal is that Kyoshi's life began in humiliation. She was born into poverty, effectively an orphan, the daughter of members of an outlaw gang who abandoned her, and she grew up unwanted and overlooked, doing menial work, nobody's idea of a chosen one. And this is the twist that the novels are built on. For years, Kyoshi was not believed to be the Avatar at all, someone else was. A young man named Yeun was identified as the Avatar, trained as the Avatar, presented to the world as the Avatar, and Kyoshi was just a servant in his orbit. Yeun was her friend, and Yeun was, through no fault of his own at first, a lie, a false Avatar. And the day the truth came out that Kyoshi was the real one, broke something in him that never healed. Yeun becomes one of the more tragic antagonists in the whole franchise. A good person hollowed out by being told he was destined for something and then having it ripped away, and much later it is Yeun who kills the man responsible for the whole deception. That man is Jianzhu, an Earth Kingdom sage, one of the people who had been searching for Kuruk's successor, and he is the central villain of Kyoshi's origin. Jianzhu is responsible for the deaths that shape her, most crucially the murder of Kelsang, an air nomad who had been a true father figure to Kyoshi, one of the only people who ever showed her kindness before she knew who she was. Kelsang's death is the wound Kyoshi's early story turns on, and in the aftermath, cast out and hunted, Kyoshi is taken in by the Flying Opera Company, the very outlaw gang her parents once ran with, people with names like Lek and Kirima and Wang, Dao Fei, criminals living outside the law, and it is among them, not among sages and masters, that Kyoshi becomes who she is. She learns to fight, she learns to survive, and she takes on the visual identity we know from the shows directly from her past. The golden metal war fans she carries were her mother's. The golden headdress was her mother's. And the dramatic war paint, the white face and red and black markings that make her look like a vengeful spirit, comes from her father's Daofi face paint, the paint of an outlaw. Everything iconic about Kyoshi's look is inherited from the 2 people who gave her up. She turned the symbols of her abandonment into the symbols of the Avatar. I should say clearly that her exact height is not a canon number. She is described as exceptionally tall, towering, but the specific figures you will see quoted, the 7 feet and so on, are fan estimates, rather than a stated fact, so we will leave it at very tall and true. And there is one more piece of who Kyoshi was as a person that the novels make plain and that matters, which is that Kyoshi was bisexual. She loved Yeun, and she loved a firebender named Rangi, who was her training partner and her protector, and across both books, her partner in the fullest sense. DiMartino confirmed the intent behind it, and the romance with Rangi is canon, woven through the whole of her story, not a footnote. For a franchise aimed largely at younger audiences, having its most physically powerful and morally uncompromising avatar be openly bisexual is not a small thing, and it is worth naming plainly rather than talking around. Now to the deeds, because Kyoshi's fingerprints are all over the world you know from The Last Airbender, in ways you might not connect to her until you look. Start with the island that bears her name. In her era, a warlord called Qin, the Conqueror, sometimes called Qin the Great, was carving up the Earth Kingdom, and his advance threatened the peninsula where Kyoshi's home village sat. What Kyoshi did in response is as jaw-dropping a use of the Avatar state as the show ever depicted. She split the entire peninsula away from the mainland. She used the Avatar state to tear a piece of land off of a continent and turn it into an island, Kyoshi Island, so that her people would be beyond the reach of the warlord's army. That is the scale she operated at. Not winning a battle, but redrawing the map, separating a chunk of the world from the rest to keep it safe. And the fate of Chin himself is one of the richest little knots of moral ambiguity in the show, one that The Last Airbender actually builds a whole episode around. The question is, did Kyoshi kill him? The precise answer canon gives is no, not directly. When she split the land, Chin was standing on the very edge of the cliff that was breaking away, and he was too proud, too stubborn to step back to safety, and the ground gave out beneath him and he fell to his death. She did not push him. She did not strike him down. His own pride killed him as the earth moved. But, and this is the crucial part, Kyoshi refuses to hide behind that technicality. In the episode Avatar Day, in the second book of The Last Airbender, Aang actually stands trial for Kyoshi's supposed murder of Chin generations later, because the people of Chin's town still hold the Avatar responsible, and Kyoshi's spirit is asked in effect to account for it. And her answer is bracing. She says she sees no difference. She says she would have killed him anyway to protect her people and preserve balance. She takes the full weight of his death onto herself, even though the strict facts would let her off. That is Kyoshi in a single moment. She will not launder her conscience with a technicality. If a man died because of what she chose to do, then she killed him, and she would do it again, and she will not pretend otherwise to feel cleaner. That same uncompromising streak is why her advice to Aang is so unsettling, and why it comes at such a loaded moment. When Aang is going from past life to past life looking for a way to defeat Ozai without killing him, hoping each avatar will hand him an escape from the violence, Kyoshi is one of the ones he asks, again in Sozin's Comet, Part 2. And where Aang wants mercy, Kyoshi gives him steel. She tells him that only justice will bring peace. She is not interested in his moral squeamishness. She built an island and founded institutions and took responsibility for a warlord's death. And her whole life says that peace is not the absence of hard choices, it is the result of someone being willing to make them. She is the counterweight to Aang's whole nature, and the series is honest enough to put her voice in his head and let it disturb him rather than reassure him. And then there are the institutions, because Kyoshi founded two orders that outlast her by centuries and sit on opposite ends of the moral spectrum, which is almost too perfect. She founded the Kyoshi Warriors, the order of female warriors who protect her island using her fans, her style of dress, and her face paint, keeping her methods alive long after her death. And in The Last Airbender, that order is led by Suki, who becomes one of Team Avatar's own. That is Kyoshi's bright legacy, a lineage of protectors. But she is also credited with founding the Dai Li in Ba Sing Se, originally created to preserve the city's cultural heritage, to protect its traditions and its history. And you know what the Dai Li became. By Aang's time, they are a secret police, a tool of surveillance and control and mind-bending oppression, the enforcers of a fearful regime. Kyoshi built both. She built the shield and she built the thing that curdled into a knife. And I think that is the truest possible summary of an avatar, as forceful as she was. When you are willing to reshape the world with that much certainty, you do not get to choose which of your creations stays pure. The same conviction that founded a guard of heroes founded a machine of oppressors, and both of them carried her name forward into a world she would never see. From Kyoshi's iron certainty, the cycle turns back to fire, and to an avatar whose defining quality was almost the opposite, a gentleness and a loyalty that a friend turned into a weapon against the whole world. His name is Roku, and he is the avatar most viewers of The Last Airbender feel they know best, because he is Aang's immediate predecessor and his most trusted guide, the past life Aang turns to again and again for wisdom. Roku is a Fire Nation firebender, and his life is bound up with the origin of the entire war that the series is about. Because Roku's story is, at its heart, the story of a friendship that curdled into the greatest catastrophe the world had ever seen. If you want to understand the 100-Year War, you do not start with armies. You start with two boys who were born on the same day and loved each other like brothers. Those two boys were Roku and Sozin. They were best friends from childhood, and they were, as it happens, born on the very same day. And they grew up side by side, close in the way that only childhood friends can be, before either of them knew what the other would become. And then, on their shared 16th birthday, the truth came out. Roku was revealed to be the Avatar. Of the two friends, it was Roku who carried the spirit of the world. And that revelation, which should have only deepened the bond, planted the seed of everything that would eventually break it, because one of these two friends was destined to serve the balance of all four nations, and the other, Sozin, would one day sit on the throne of the Fire Nation with ambitions that the balance could not survive. Before Roku left to travel the world and master the other elements, as every avatar must, Sozin gave him a gift, a headpiece, the Crown Prince's own headpiece, and I want to be precise here because it is often misremembered. This was a parting gift between friends, given as Roku set off on his journey, not a wedding present. Roku wore it for the rest of his life. He married a woman named Ta Min, and for a while the friendship held. Where it broke is one of the saddest small scenes the show gives us, and it happens at Roku's own wedding. Sozin, now Fire Lord, takes his old friend aside on what should be a day of pure celebration and proposes something. He suggests that the Fire Nation, being so prosperous, so advanced, has a kind of duty to share that prosperity with the rest of the world, to spread it outward, to bring the other nations under the Fire Nation's enlightened guidance. It is empire dressed in the language of generosity, and Roku sees straight through it. He refuses flatly, and he tells Sozin that the four nations are meant to be separate, that their separation is what preserves the balance of the world, and that he will not allow the Fire Nation to expand into the others. And that is the fork in the road. Everything the series is about grows out of that refusal at a wedding. The friendship does not shatter all at once, but it is fatally cracked, and it fully breaks years later when Roku discovers that Sozin has begun building colonies in the other nations anyway, taking the first steps toward the empire Roku forbade. Roku confronts him, destroys those early colonies, and comes within a breath of killing his oldest friend, sparing him with a warning that if he ever tries again, Roku will end him. Two men who were once inseparable, one now threatening the other's life to keep him from conquering the world. The full weight of this history is delivered in a single episode, one of the finest the series ever made, called The Avatar and the Fire Lord in the third book, which first aired in the autumn of 2007, but we actually meet Roku's power much earlier in the first book in an episode called Winter Solstice, Part 2, Avatar Roku, which aired in the spring of 2005. In that story, Aang travels to a Fire Nation temple during the solstice, when the connection between the Avatar and his past lives is strongest, and he makes contact with Roku directly, and Roku briefly possesses him, takes hold of Aang's body and moves through it, and what follows is a display of raw Avatar power that reminds you exactly how formidable Roku was. He overpowers the treacherous Commander Zhao, he overpowers the Fire Sages, he overpowers Zuko, and he raises molten magma out of the volcano beneath the temple, a wall of fire and stone answering to a dead man borrowing a boy's body. It is one of the first times the show lets you feel the sheer scale of what an avatar is, and it is Roku, not Aang, doing it. Now to the fire that killed him, because Roku's death is the hinge the entire timeline swings on, and it is a betrayal that mirrors the friendship it destroyed. Roku died confronting a volcanic eruption on his own home island, throwing everything he had into holding back the destruction, trying to save the people who lived there. And in the middle of that fight, Sozin came. His old friend, the man he had once threatened to kill, arrived, and for a moment helped him, the two of them working together one last time against the mountain. But then the volcano released a cloud of toxic gas, and it overcame Roku, dropped him, left him helpless and choking on the ground. And Sozin looked at his oldest friend, lying there, dying. One hand reached out and made a calculation. He understood that if Roku died, there would be a window, a gap before the next avatar could grow up and master the elements and stand in his way. So Sozin left him. He turned and flew away and let the gas take Roku, chose his empire over the person he had loved longest in the world. Roku died there on his own island, and his loyal dragon Fang, who had stayed with him through all of it, died at his side rather than leave him. Roku was around 70 years old by the accounts we have, though the show never nails the number down precisely. And here is the piece of cosmic machinery that makes Roku's death ripple further than any other in the cycle. The moment an avatar dies, the next is born, instantly, no gap in the soul, even if there is a gap in ability. So the moment Sozin abandoned Roku to die, an air nomad child was born, the child who would become Aang. And Sozin knew what that meant. He knew a new avatar now existed somewhere among the air nomads, a helpless infant who would one day be the only thing standing between him and the world. And a comet was coming, a comet that grants firebenders overwhelming power, the comet that would later be named after Sozin himself. So Sozin used it. He timed a war to the comet's arrival, and with that borrowed power, he launched the assault that began the 100-Year War, and in a single coordinated stroke, tried to wipe out the entire air nomad people, the whole nation, in order to kill the one air nomad child who is now the Avatar. He murdered a civilization to try to murder a baby. And he failed at the one thing that mattered, because that child, Aang, survived, frozen in ice, and Roku's own spirit would later reach across the years to warn Aang that the comet was coming back, that he had until the end of summer, guiding from beyond the grave the boy who was born the instant Roku died. There is one last fact about Roku that reframes the whole series once you know it, and it is a matter of blood. Roku is the maternal great-grandfather of Zuko and Azula. His line runs down through his daughter Rina to Ursa to her children Zuko and Azula. And Sozin, meanwhile, is their paternal great-grandfather, his line running down through Azalan to Ozai, which means that Zuko and Azula are descended from both of them, from the Avatar, and from the tyrant who abandoned him, the two boys born on the same day whose friendship broke the world. The blood of Roku and the blood of Sozin meet again generations later in the same two children. And the whole of Zuko's struggle, his agonized turn from his father's path toward his own conscience, is in a sense the two great-grandfathers fighting it out one more time inside a single person. Zuko choosing to help the Avatar instead of serve the Fire Lord is Roku finally winning the argument he lost at that wedding, settled at last in his own descendant. And the Avatar Zuko chose to help was the boy born the moment Roku died, the last of the air nomads, the one Sozin's whole war was designed to erase. His name is Aang, and he is the one almost everyone means when they say Avatar, the boy in the iceberg, the last airbender, the 12-year-old with an arrow on his head who carried the weight of 100 years of war on shoulders that were, chronologically, far too young for it. And the thing that makes Aang's whole existence a kind of miracle and a kind of tragedy is that he was the Avatar the entire 100-Year War was designed to prevent, and he survived only by accident, only by being afraid, only by running away. Because that is how Aang begins, if you trace it back, honestly. He was born to the air nomads about a dozen years before the genocide, and he was an extraordinary child, a natural airbending prodigy. He earned his arrow tattoos, the mark of a master, by mastering 35 of the 36 tiers of airbending and by inventing a technique of his own, the air scooter, that ball of spinning air he rides around on. That made him the youngest known airbending master in history, a master at 12 years old. A record that would stand for well over a century until his own granddaughter Jinora earned her tattoos at 11. So Aang was, from the start, exceptional. But being told he was the Avatar, being pulled away from a normal childhood and burdened with the expectations of the whole world while he was still a boy, frightened him. And one night, overwhelmed, he ran. He took his sky bison, Appa, and he fled, and a storm caught them over the ocean, and they went down into the freezing water. And in that moment of mortal danger, Aang's body did what the Avatar's body does without asking permission. It entered the Avatar state, that involuntary defense where all the power of every past life floods in, and it froze the water around him into a protective sphere of ice, sealing him and Appa inside, suspended, alive but unconscious, in a state that stopped time for him. And that is the accident that saved the world. Because while Aang slept in that iceberg, Sozin's comet came, and the Fire Nation launched its war, and it carried out the genocide of the air nomads, wiping out Aang's entire people in a coordinated strike aimed in large part at killing the new Avatar before he could grow up and stop them. But the new Avatar was not among the air nomads to be killed. He was at the bottom of the sea, frozen, hidden, exactly where no one thought to look, kept alive by the same fear that had made him flee. Aang survived the genocide of his own people because he was not there for it, and he would wake up 100 years later to find that everyone he had ever known was dead, an entire culture reduced to empty temples and his own memory. He is the last airbender in the plainest and loneliest sense. The freeze that saved his life also stole his whole world. He is freed a century later by two teenagers of the Southern Water Tribe, Katara and Sokka, who crack open the iceberg and let him out. And from there, the series proper begins, 61 episodes across 3 books named for the elements water, earth, and fire, first airing in the winter of 2005 and concluding in the summer of 2008. And the spine of that story is Aang doing, in a single desperate year, what an avatar is normally given a lifetime to do, mastering all 4 elements. He already has air. He learns waterbending first alongside Katara, and then more formally under Master Pakku in the north. He learns earthbending from Toph Beifong, the blind earthbending prodigy who becomes one of the great characters of the whole franchise, and who would later invent metalbending, an art we will come back to properly toward the end of the night. And Aang learns firebending, first briefly from a deserter named Zhong Zhong in the first book, and then in the third from the least likely teacher imaginable, from Zuko, the exiled prince who had spent the whole series hunting him, and who finally chose the other path, the path of his great-grandfather Roku. Which brings us to the defining thing about Aang as an avatar, the thing that sets him apart from almost everyone who came before him in this cycle, and it is a matter of conscience. Aang, raised by monks who taught that all life is sacred, did not want to kill. And the whole series builds toward a problem that his gentleness makes almost unbearable, because to end the war he would have to defeat Fire Lord Ozai. And every past avatar he consults, the ones we have already met, Roku and Kyoshi and Kuruk and Yangchen, tells him some version of the same hard truth, that his duty to the world outweighs his personal need to keep his hands clean, that sometimes the avatar has to do the terrible necessary thing they all tell him to be willing to kill. And Aang refuses to accept that. And the beautiful thing about his ending is that his refusal is not treated as naivety to be corrected. He finds a third way. He learns from the last of the lion turtles, the same ancient creatures who started all of this in Wan's time, an art thought lost, energy bending, the power to bend the energy inside another person. And during Sozin's comet, at the height of Ozai's power, Aang uses energy bending to strip Ozai of his firebending entirely, to take his power away rather than his life. He defeats the tyrant and keeps his soul intact, and in doing so he closes the loop all the way back to the lion turtles, the original benders, who gave and took power at the very beginning. The energy that was once loaned to hunters is now used to disarm a would-be god emperor. That is a stunning piece of storytelling architecture, the first source of bending reaching across 10,000 years, to give the last airbender the one tool that lets him win without becoming what he is fighting. But I do not want to move past the moment Aang died, because he did die, and it is one of the load-bearing facts of this whole cosmology, one people forget or soften. At the end of the second book, in the catacombs beneath Ba Sing Se, Aang was struck by lightning from Azula at the exact instant he was rising into the avatar state. And that timing is everything, because of a rule the show treats as absolute, the deepest vulnerability the avatar has. If the avatar is killed while in the avatar state, the cycle ends forever. No new avatar is ever born. The unbroken chain running back to Wan simply stops, because in the avatar state, the past lives are all present at once, and to kill the avatar then is to kill all of them, the whole line in one stroke. And that is exactly what almost happened. Azula's lightning killed Aang in the avatar state. For a moment, the entire future of the cycle, everything and everyone that would ever come after, hung on a dead boy in a cave. And what saved it was a small vial of spirit water that Katara had carried all the way from the spirit oasis in the north, water with healing properties from a sacred place, and she used it to bring him back. Sit with how close that was. If Katara had not had that water, there would be no Korra, no avatar after Aang at all, ever. The 10,000-year cycle severed in a basement by a teenage girl who understood exactly what she was doing. The whole rest of the franchise exists because of one vial of water and one girl who refused to let him stay dead. Aang lived a long life after the war, longer than Roku, longer than Kuruk by decades, though nowhere near Kyoshi's centuries. He married Katara, and together they had 3 children, and those 3 children are a quiet lesson in how bending does not follow neat rules. Bumi, their eldest, was born a non-bender, no bending at all, and only much later in his life, after a harmonic convergence in Korra's era, did he suddenly gain airbending. Kaya, their daughter, was a waterbender like her mother, and Tenzin, their youngest, became an airbending master, the one who carried the air nomad heritage forward and would one day teach the next avatar. Aang spent his life rebuilding, helping found a new city meant to be a place where all the nations could live together, working to restore the balance Sozin had shattered. And he died at 66 years old, which is young for the weight he carried. And the moment he died, in keeping with the rule that governs all of it, the next avatar was born into the Southern Water Tribe, the tribe of the girl who had once pulled him out of the ice. The last Airbender's death gave the world a waterbender, and her name was Korra, and her story would test every single rule this cosmology runs on and break one of them for good. Her name is Korra, and she is, as of everything canon has released, the last avatar we have actually met, the current holder of the spirit, and in many ways she is the most human of all of them, because her series is less about saving the world from a single Dark Lord and more about a young woman being broken down over and over and having to rebuild herself each time. If Aang's story is a boy learning he has to grow up fast, Korra's is an adult learning that being the mightiest person alive does not protect you from trauma, from doubt, or from loss. And her show, The Legend of Korra, is braver and stranger and sadder than people gave it credit for when it aired. She was born in the Southern Water Tribe, Aang's successor, and where Aang was a reluctant avatar who ran from the role, Korra was the opposite from the very beginning, a child who could not wait to be the avatar and never doubted for a second that she was meant for it. The show tells us she was bending water, earth, and fire by the age of 4, 3 elements as a toddler, announcing to a pair of stunned White Lotus members that she was the avatar with total, fearless confidence. She was a prodigy of raw power in a way none of her predecessors quite were. And that becomes the engine of her whole arc because the one element she could not force her way into was air, the element of freedom and detachment and spiritual openness, everything that did not come naturally to a headstrong girl who solved problems by hitting them. She had to be taught airbending by Tenzin, Aang's own son, in Republic City, the very city Aang helped build. And her struggle to learn it is really her struggle to become a whole person rather than just a weapon. Her series runs 4 books, and unusually each one gives her a different antagonist and a different kind of threat, which is part of why the show feels like 4 short films about the same woman at different stages of damage. In the first book, she faces Aemon and a revolutionary movement called the Equalists, who weaponize the real resentment of non-benders against the privilege of benders. And Aemon's terrifying signature is that he appears to be able to take a person's bending away permanently by touch, like a faith healer in reverse. In the second book, she faces her own uncle, Unalaq, and behind him the return of a name we have not spoken since the very beginning of tonight, Vatu, the spirit of chaos that Wan imprisoned 10,000 years before. In the third book, she faces the Red Lotus, a group of anarchist revolutionaries led by a brilliant, serene, deeply frightening man named Zahir, who believe the Avatar and all the world's governments should simply be torn down. And in the fourth, she faces Kuvira, a military strongwoman trying to forge a new empire out of the chaos, a book that is really about Korra, recovering from what the third book did to her. 4 villains, 4 ideologies, 1 avatar getting hurt worse each time. I want to take the first book's threat seriously because it plays directly on a rule we have already talked about. Aemon seemed to remove people's bending forever, and that is presented as a horror precisely because we understand, from Aang's era, that bending is meant to be part of who a person is. But here, the show does something clever with its own cosmology, because Aemon was not actually doing what Aang did. Aemon was not energy bending. Aemon, whose real name was Noatak, was a bloodbender of extraordinary and rare power, able to bloodbend without the full moon, which almost no one can do. And what he was really doing was a kind of psychic bloodbending that blocked a person's ability to access their chi. It looked permanent. It was not. It was, in principle, reversible. And it was reversed, because at her lowest point in that first book, after Amon takes her bending too, Korra makes contact with the spirit of Aang, her past life, and Aang restores her bending and gives her the ability to restore it to others through energy bending, the same lion turtle art he used on Ozai. That is the last great gift Aang gives across the boundary of death, and it matters enormously that Korra could still reach him then in that first book, because that ability, the ability to reach back and touch her past lives, is exactly what she is about to lose. This is the moment we have been circling all night, the single biggest gut punch in the entire franchise for anyone who cares about the cycle, and it happens at the end of the second book in the finale, during a harmonic convergence, the same rare event where Wan first fused with Rava 10,000 years earlier. Korra's uncle Unalaq had freed Vaatu, and he merged with Vaatu the way Wan once merged with Rava, becoming a dark avatar, an inversion of everything Korra is. And in the battle that follows, Vaatu, through Unalaq, does something that had never been done in 10,000 years. He rips Rava out of Korra, tears the spirit of light out of the avatar, and destroys her, beats her into nothing right in front of Korra. And the consequence of that is the thing I need you to understand clearly, because it is the fact people get wrong more than any other in Avatar. When Rava was destroyed, Korra's connection to all of her past lives was severed, not just to Aang, to every single avatar back to Wan. Roku, Kyoshi, Kuruk, Yangchen, Szeto, all of them. The entire chain, the whole line of figures receding into shadow that we opened tonight with, cut off from her in an instant. Now I have to be precise, because this is the exact place where people get it wrong in both directions. The past avatars were not killed. Their spirits still exist in the spirit world. Wan is still out there, Aang is still out there, in whatever way the dead persist in this cosmology. What was destroyed was the link, the ability to commune with them, the bridge back to Korra's own former selves. Rava was the thread that connected each avatar to all the ones before, and when Vaatu destroyed Rava, that thread was cut, and the devastating part is that it did not grow back. Korra reformed Rava. She found a fragment of that light still inside her and rebuilt her and merged with her again to defeat Vaatu and begin the cycle anew. And you might assume that restoring Rava would restore the connection too. It did not. Across the 2 remaining books of her series and across all the graphic novels that continue her story, Korra never regains the ability to speak with her past lives. It is gone for good. She is, in a real sense, the first avatar since Wan to stand alone, cut off from 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom, the first link in a brand new chain whether she wanted to be or not. Think about what that costs her and what it costs every avatar who will ever come after her, Pavi and all the unnamed ones down the future line. When Aang was frightened, he could sit with Roku and Kyoshi and Yangchen and ask them what to do, and they answered, and we watched them answer all through his series. Korra will never have that again. When she faces Zahir and Kuvira, when she is at her most broken, there is no Aang to reach for anymore, no counsel of her former selves. She has to figure it out with only the people currently alive around her, her friends, her teachers, herself. The show turned the Avatar from a being who carries all of history inside them into a woman who has to do it alone. And I think that is one of the boldest choices any long-running fantasy story has ever made about its own protagonist. To take away the thing that most defined the role permanently and refuse to undo it. The third book is where the show cashes in the cruelty of that isolation. And it is also where the cycle very nearly ended again, so I will only touch it here and come back to it, because Zahir and the Red Lotus understood the deepest rule of the Avatar better than almost any villain in the franchise, and they built their entire plan around it. And the fourth book is Korra's long, painful recovery from what they did to her. 3 years of physical and psychological damage before she can stand as the Avatar again, which is a radical thing to put in a show for young audiences. An all-powerful hero laid low by trauma and taking years to heal. But before the personal cost, there is the world Korra remade, because for all that she suffered, she changed the shape of the world more permanently than any Avatar since Wan himself. And she did it by undoing his founding act. At the end of that same second book, having lost her past lives, Korra made a choice that reverses 10,000 years of the Avatar's purpose. She chose to leave both spirit portals open. Remember, Wan closed them, sealed the human and spirit worlds apart to keep Vaatu locked away and to protect powerless humans from the wilds. Korra looked at that ancient separation and decided it was time for it to end, that the world should be joined again, that humans and spirits should learn to live together as they had before Wan. And she left the portals open, and the world she leaves behind is one where spirits walk among people again. A permanent, era-defining change. The very first Avatar defined the role by shutting the door between the worlds. The newest one defined herself by opening it back up. The whole cycle from Wan to Korra is bracketed by those two opposite decisions, and I do not think that is an accident. She changed one more thing that reaches back to the beginning of tonight too. Before Korra's era, the air nomads were all but extinct, just Tenzin and his family, the thin thread of Aang's descendants. But after the harmonic convergence in her second book, something happened that the show pointedly never fully explains. Non-airbenders across the world spontaneously began to gain airbending. Aang's own son, Bumi, born a non-bender, suddenly could airbend. So could Zahir, unfortunately for everyone. And Korra and Tenzin seized on this, gathering these new airbenders, rebuilding a whole new air nation from scratch, restoring the nation that Sozin's comet had wiped out 170 years earlier. The genocide that opened Aang's story is, in a sense, finally answered in Korra's, the erased nation reborn, though how or why remains a mystery the writers left open on purpose. And there is the matter of who Korra loved, which became a landmark moment in television history. Across her series, Korra is close to two brothers, Mako and Bolin, and she dates Mako for a stretch. But the relationship the series ultimately builds toward, slowly at first and then unmistakably, is with Asami Szeto, a brilliant engineer and one of Korra's closest friends. And in the final shot of the entire series, the two of them walk together into a spirit portal, hand in hand, looking into each other's eyes, a couple. It is understated by the standards of romance, but for a Western animated series aimed partly at children, in that era, to end on two women in love was genuinely groundbreaking, a moment fans call Korrasami. And the creators later confirmed it was exactly what it looked like. The avatar who lost her connection to every version of herself who came before ends her story having found a person to face the future with, which feels, honestly, like the right ending for her. She could not reach backward anymore, so the show gave her someone to go forward with. Korra remains the avatar through all the graphic novels that continue her story, the current holder of the spirit, and the last avatar we have fully known. But she is not the end of the line because canon has already told us who comes next, an avatar we have barely glimpsed, from a show that has not yet aired. Her name is Pavi, and I have to be honest with you from the first word here because we know almost nothing about her. And most of what has been said about her lives in the uncertain space between an announcement and a finished show. Pavi is Korra's successor, the next avatar in the cycle, an earthbender, and she is the protagonist of a new animated series that has been announced under the title Avatar: Seven Havens. That much comes from the people making it. Beyond that, we are in the territory of press releases and early reveals, the kind of thing that can change before anything actually airs. And I would rather tell you plainly what is solid and what is not than pretend we know more than we do. What seems established is the broad shape. Pavi is an earthbender, which fits the cycle perfectly because the order runs fire, air, water, earth, repeating, and Korra was water, so an earth avatar is exactly who should come next, the cycle keeping its ancient rhythm even into a story we have not seen. And the setting has been described as a world reshaped by a cataclysm, a more dangerous and broken world than the one Korra knew. One where the avatar is no longer a revered figure but something closer to hunted, which would be a striking place to take the role after everything Korra did to open the world back up to the spirits. There have been mentions of a twin, of companions, of a premiere somewhere around the middle of this decade, but I should mark all of that clearly as tentative, the sort of detail that gets floated during development and is not yet locked into anything you can call canon. Seven Havens has not been released. Until it is, Pavi is less a character we know than a promise the cycle is making, the next lamp on the road still unlit, and there is something almost fitting about ending our walk through the named avatars on a figure we can barely see. Because that is, in a sense, the truest picture of the entire cycle. For every Wan or Aang or Kyoshi that we get to know intimately, there are hundreds we only glimpse as silhouettes. And Pavi, right now, is standing in that same half-light, one more face we cannot quite make out yet, waiting for a story to bring her forward. She is the future of the cycle the way the unnamed multitude is its past, mostly unknown, mostly unwritten, a life the spirit will pass into that we have not yet been allowed to meet. When Seven Havens arrives, she will step out of that shadow and become as real to us as the others. Until then, she is the reminder that the cycle does not stop, that Wan's promise to Ra'ava is still being kept, that there is always a next one being born the moment the last one dies, on and on, whether we are watching or not. So that is every Avatar canon has actually named, from the first to the newest. Wan and Gun and Salai and Szeto and Yangchen and Kuruk and Kyoshi and Roku and Aang and Korra and waiting in the wings, Pavi. 10 known lives and one just arriving out of a line that runs for 10,000 years. And now that we have walked the whole of it, I want to spend the rest of our time tonight not on individual avatars, but on the things that connect all of them. The rules and the patterns and the strange recurring shapes that only show up once you have seen the whole line laid out end to end. Because there is a lot hiding in the gaps between these lives that is worth dwelling on in the dark. Start with the simplest question, the one a child would ask, and watch how quickly it turns out to have no clean answer. How many avatars have there ever been? You would think, for a franchise this carefully built, that there would be a number, a figure someone could point to. This many souls have carried the spirit since Wan. And there is not. Canon has never given us one. The best anyone can do is count the statues, because the shows do give us a visual sense of the depth of the line. In the Southern Air Temple and elsewhere, and in the great sweeping shots of the Avatar state, you see them, rows and rows of past avatars, statues and silhouettes receding into the distance, and dedicated fans have gone through those images frame by frame, counting the figures, and they land somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple hundred, roughly 180 or so, before the line simply dissolves into shadow and you cannot count anymore. But I have to be clear about what that number is and is not. It is a fan estimate, drawn from squinting at background art. It is not a canon figure. The creators never stood up and said there have been exactly this many avatars. So even the total, the simplest fact you could want about a cycle this old, is a guess, and an incomplete one, because the statues we can see almost certainly do not represent the full 10,000 years. The arithmetic from there gets strange and a little haunting, worth turning over slowly in the quiet. 10,000 years roughly is how long the cycle has run, from Wan to Korra. If you divide that span by a couple hundred avatars, you get an average lifespan of around 50 years each, which actually lines up reasonably with the ages we do know: Roku at 70, Aang at 66, Kuruk cut down at 33, and Kyoshi's 230 pulling the average up all by herself. So a couple hundred avatars across 10,000 years is not an unreasonable count. But think about what it means. It means that of the roughly 200 human beings who have carried the single most important spirit in the world, who have each been, in their time, the bridge between the human and the spirit worlds, the one being capable of ending wars and reshaping continents, we know the names of about 10. 10. The other 190 lived entire lives, mastered all 4 elements, faced their own villains and their own tragedies, loved people, lost people, saved the world in their own eras, and then died, and the record kept nothing but a silhouette, a shape in the background of someone else's shot. That, to me, is one of the quietly devastating ideas in all of Avatar, and it is the reason I wanted to spend a whole video walking the named ones, because naming them is the only pushback we get against that erasure. Every one of those silhouettes was a Korra. Everyone was an Aang. Each of them woke up one day and learned they were the Avatar and had their childhood rearranged around it and carried the weight we watched Aang and Korra struggle under, and did it without an audience, without a series, without anyone to remember what it cost them. The cycle is, in this sense, a monument to forgetting. It keeps the spirit and discards the person over and over across 100 centuries, and only a handful ever get pulled back out of the dark long enough for us to learn who they were. And notice how recent even our knowledge is. For a long time, the only named avatars fans had were the ones from the last Airbender itself. Roku and Kyoshi and Kuruk and Yangchen, glimpsed in a single episode each or mentioned in passing. Wan did not exist for us until the Legend of Korra reached back and invented him. Szeto was just a name for years before the novels gave him a story. Gun and Salai only appeared in a book published a few years ago, which means the list of known avatars is not fixed. It grows. Every new novel, every new series has the power to reach into that shadowed line and pull one more figure forward into the light to give a silhouette a name and a face and a tragedy. There may be avatars we will come to know intimately a decade from now who, tonight, are just an unremarkable shape in the back of a crowd, indistinguishable from the 200 others. The line is not closed. It is a reservoir the storytellers can keep drawing from forever because they built it deep on purpose. I find a strange comfort in that. Honestly, the same comfort you might find looking up at a sky full of stars you will never learn the names of. You do not need to know every avatar for the cycle to mean something. The point of the silhouettes is not that we are meant to know them. The point is that they were there, that the spirit was never idle, that for 10,000 unbroken years, through eras we have no record of and disasters no one wrote down, there was always someone carrying it, always a next one born the moment the last one died. A relay race with no finish line run by people whose names the world lost almost immediately. When you see that long line trailing off into shadow, you're not looking at a failure of record keeping. You're looking at the sheer, staggering length of a promise being kept. And some of those forgotten runners came terrifyingly close to dropping the baton. Because for all its apparent permanence, this cycle could have ended for good more than once. And a few times it very nearly did. The cycle feels eternal when you look at that endless line, unbreakable, a law of nature. But it is not a law of nature. It is fragile in a very specific way, and the stories return to that fragility again and again, because the single most dangerous idea in this entire world is that the avatar can be ended, not just killed, but ended. The whole 10,000-year chain snaps so that no new avatar is ever born again. And when you lay the named avatars out end to end, you realize the cycle came to the very edge of that abyss more than once, and survived by margins so thin they should frighten anyone who loves this world. The vulnerability itself we have already named. Kill the avatar in the avatar state and the reincarnation stops, permanently, because in that state every past life is present and channeled at once. So to strike the avatar down then is to cut the whole line in a single blow. That is the rule the danger hangs on, and the frightening thing is not that it exists, but that the villains of this world keep figuring it out. It is not obscure lore hidden from them. The people who most want the avatar gone tend to be exactly the people clever enough to learn how the avatar can be gone for good. The first great attempt on the cycle came before the last Airbender even begins, and we have already touched its edges, so I will only gesture at it because Sozin's plan was, at its root, an attempt to end the cycle. He did not merely want to win a war. By timing his genocide to the comet and trying to wipe out every air nomad, his deepest aim was to kill the new avatar in infancy before the child could ever grow into the avatar state. And if he had succeeded, if he had found the frozen boy in the iceberg, the cycle would not have simply passed to the next nation, because Aang was the current holder, and killing him young would still have moved the spirit along. The permanent end was never quite on the table there. What Sozin nearly did was worse in a different way. He nearly ran out the clock on a world with no realized avatar to defend it. And that is its own kind of catastrophe, 100 years where the one being meant to keep balance was asleep at the bottom of the sea. The moment the cycle came truly, permanently close to ending is the one we walk through in Aang's story, the lightning in the catacombs beneath Ba Sing Se. And I will not retell it because you remember it. The strike landing at the exact instant he rose into the avatar state, the closest the entire chain has ever come to being cut, saved by a vial of spirit water and a girl who refused to let go. But I raise it again here only to put it beside the others, because the thing that makes it so much heavier once you have seen the whole cycle is that Aang was not just one avatar dying. In that state, for that instant, he was all of them. If he had stayed dead, Wan's promise, 10,000 years of it, would have ended in a basement, and every unnamed silhouette in that long line would have had their story truly finished. No continuation, no next one. The relay dropped at last. It is the narrowest the world has ever come to losing the avatar forever, and it turned on inches and seconds. And then, generations later, in Korra's time, someone tried to do it on purpose, with full knowledge of exactly what they were doing, and that is a story I actually want to tell in full, because it is the clearest look the franchise ever gives us at how the cycle dies. His name was Zahir, the leader of the Red Lotus, and he is among the eeriest villains in all of Avatar precisely because he is not raving or cruel for its own sake. He is calm, he is well-read, He truly believes that the world would be freer and better without the Avatar and without the governments the Avatar props up. That true balance comes from tearing down all authority, natural order through chaos. And he is willing to follow that belief all the way to its most terrible conclusion. And Zahir understood the deep rule. He knew that killing Korra in an ordinary way would accomplish nothing, would just move the spirit to the next child in the Earth Kingdom and let the cycle roll on. To actually end the Avatar, to get the thing he really wanted, he had to kill her while she was in the Avatar state. So the Red Lotus engineered exactly that. They captured Korra and they used a liquid metal poison forced into her body. And the poison did something specific and horrible. It drove her into the Avatar state involuntarily, forced the glow, forced the channeling of all her past power, because the Avatar state is partly a defense against mortal threat, and the poison was a mortal threat flooding her veins. They deliberately triggered the one condition under which killing her would end the cycle forever, and then they waited to kill her in it. That was the whole plan. Not to defeat the Avatar, but to make sure there would never be another one. To snap the chain at Korra so that Pavi and every Avatar who would ever follow simply never came to exist. It is the coldest, most calculated assault the cycle has ever faced. An enemy who did his homework and aimed straight at the one true weakness. And it very nearly worked. Korra survived it, barely, pulled back from the edge by the people around her. But survival is almost the wrong word for what she was left with. She did not walk away. The poison and the trauma broke her body and her mind, and she spent the better part of 3 years afterward barely able to function as the Avatar at all. Physically wrecked, haunted, seeing visions of her own poisoned self in the Avatar state, unable to enter it, unable to be what she was. The 4th book of her series is almost entirely about that long crawl back from what the Red Lotus did. So even though the cycle survived, Zahir succeeded at something. He proved that you do not have to actually snap the chain to do lasting damage to it. You only have to get close enough, and the Avatar carries the wound for years. Lay those moments side by side, Sozin's comet, the lightning in Ba Sing Se, the Red Lotus poison, and you notice the same shape each time. The cycle is never threatened by brute force alone, by simply being outfought. It is threatened by understanding, by an enemy who grasps the rules well enough to aim at the seam. And it survives every time, not because the Avatar is invincible, but because someone else refuses to let the line end. Katara with her spirit water, Korra's friends dragging her back from the poison, ordinary people standing between the cycle and the abyss. That is the quiet argument the whole franchise keeps making about its most powerful being. The Avatar, alone in the Avatar state, at the height of all their borrowed power, is at their most vulnerable, and what saves them is never more power. It is the people who love them, which is maybe why the loves of the Avatars, across the whole line, matter more than any list of their victories. Here is a pattern you only notice once you have all of them lined up, and it is the one that stays with me longest. For a series of stories about the mightiest beings in their world, an astonishing amount of what matters about the Avatars is who they loved, and how much it cost them, and how often the role and the love were at war with each other. If you want to understand what being the Avatar actually does to a person, do not look at the battles. Look at the relationships, because that is where the price gets paid, silently, in private, in the one part of life the Avatar is supposed to have, and so rarely gets to keep. Think about Kuruk and what love did to him. His whole tragedy is a love story that the spirit world reached into and ruined. Umi was taken from him not because of anything she did, but because of what he was. A blow aimed at the Avatar that landed on the person the Avatar loved. And the cruelty of it was that his power, the thing that made him worth striking at, was useless to save her. He could not kill Ko without killing her. The mightiest being in the world, and love left him standing there able to do nothing. And he carried that helplessness past his own death, still searching. That is the darkest version of the pattern, love as the exposed nerve, the place where an enemy who cannot beat the Avatar can still destroy them. Then look at Kyoshi, the hardest and most uncompromising Avatar of them all. And notice that even her story softens into a love story when you look closely. For all her iron, for all the institutions and the map splitting and the refusal to launder her conscience, The thing the novels center her on is who she let close, the friend she loved and lost to bitterness, and Rangi, the firebender who trained her and guarded her and stayed. Kyoshi could tear a peninsula off a continent, and what grounded her, what made her a person rather than a force, was being loved by someone who knew exactly how dangerous she was and stayed anyway. It matters that the show's most bisexual, most powerful avatar is also one of its great romances, because it insists that even the fiercest of them needed the same thing the rest of us need. Roku's love was quieter, and it ended in the cruelest irony of any of them. He married Tamin, he built a life, and the friendship that shaped his youth, the love of a different kind he had for Sozin, is what killed him in the end, a boyhood bond that turned to betrayal on a volcano's slope. Roku is the avatar whose great relationship was not a romance at all, but a friendship. And the lesson buried in his death is that the avatar's connections are never simple, that the person born the same day as you, who gives you a gift when you leave and stands beside you at your wedding, can be the same person who watches you die and walks away. Love and betrayal in the same face, across a whole lifetime. And then Aang, who out of all of them got the thing the others mostly did not, a love that lasted. He married Katara, the girl who freed him from the ice and the one who brought him back from death in the catacombs. And they built a family, 3 children, a life after the war. Aang is the avatar whose love story got a happy ending. And I do not think that is incidental to who he was, because Aang was the one who refused to give up his gentleness, who insisted the avatar could keep his soul intact, and the reward the story gives him for that refusal is the one thing the role usually takes, a whole life spent beside the person he loved. It is not lost on me that the avatar most committed to not becoming hard is the avatar who got to keep his heart in every sense, and Korra, the one who lost the most, ends her story by finding someone to face the future with. And after everything we said about her, the severed past lives, the poison, the years of recovery, that ending lands with real weight. She could not reach backward to any version of herself anymore. Every avatar before her was cut off from her forever. So the story gave her a Sami, someone to go forward with instead, and made that the final image, 2 people walking into the unknown together. For the avatar who was stripped of the entire inheritance of the role, love is not a side plot. It is the replacement for everything she lost. The one connection the poison and the dark avatar could not sever. There is even, if you want to reach for it, a love story at the very beginning in Wan, whose great bond was not with another person at all, but with Rava, a union the show explicitly calls something not even death could part, a merging so complete that when he died, he did not truly leave her. The whole cycle, in a sense, is founded on a kind of marriage, a spirit, and a soul bound so tightly that the bond outlived the man and became the mechanism of every rebirth after. 10,000 years of avatars exist because the first one loved or was bound to a spirit closely enough that death could not undo it. So when people ask what the avatar is really about, I think the honest answer is not balance or power or the 4 elements, though it is all of those. It is that the avatar is a person the world keeps asking to give everything. And love is the one thing that is truly theirs to give or lose. The one part of the job that is not about nations at all. Kuruk lost it and never recovered. Roku's turned on him. Kyoshi guarded hers like a fortress. Aang got to keep his. Korra rebuilt her whole self around hers. The victories fade into the same shadow as the silhouettes. What the stories remember, what they return to, is who each of them loved, because that, more than any feat of bending, is where you find the person underneath the avatar. There is a slow, sad drift you can trace across the named avatars if you watch not the avatars themselves, but the world around them. The way the world treats the person carrying the spirit, and it moves in one direction over the 10,000 years, from worship toward suspicion, from a figure people built festivals around toward a figure people build movements to destroy. The avatar's place in the world erodes, era by era, and by the time we reach the newest stories, the avatar is not a revered guardian at all, but something closer to a hunted fugitive. And that arc tells you as much about this world as any single avatar's life does. Go back to the old ones and the reverence is almost total. Zeto's era honored him with a festival that lasted, a holiday the Fire Nation kept on its calendar because a man had saved them and they knew it, and they wanted to remember. Yangchen was close to a saint, her festival one of the highest holy days her people had. Her name spoken with awe across all 4 nations long after her death, so revered that Aang, hundreds of years later, still felt the weight of her when he heard it. In those ages, the Avatar was not questioned. The Avatar was the closest thing this world had to a living link with the divine, a person whose word could settle disputes between nations and whose deeds became scripture. To be the Avatar, then, was to be beloved, almost by default, to inherit not just power but reverence, the accumulated faith of everyone who remembered the last one. And then watch it start to curdle. The first great crack is Sozin, because Sozin's war did something to the idea of the Avatar that no lost battle could. He made the Avatar an enemy of a nation's ambition. For the Fire Nation to conquer the world, the Avatar had to be recast, from the beloved guardian who honored Szeto into an obstacle, a threat, the one force standing in the way of Fire Nation greatness, and so an entire nation was taught, over generations, to fear and hate the very role it had once thrown festivals for. That is a staggering reversal when you hold the 2 ends of it together. The same country that revered Avatar Szeto raised children to cheer for the extermination of Avatar Aang. Reverence did not just fade there, it was deliberately inverted, turned into its opposite by a state that found the Avatar inconvenient. By Korra's time, the erosion has spread and deepened and become something more sophisticated than one nation's propaganda, because now the opposition to the Avatar is ideological, argued, almost philosophical, and that is what makes her villains so much more modern than Aang's. Amun did not just oppose Korra, he built a mass movement on the claim that Benders, and by extension the Avatar, were an unfair concentration of power that ordinary people had every right to resent and tear down. Zahir went further and argued that the Avatar was a prop holding up corrupt governments, that the world would be freer without the role existing at all. These are not tyrants who want to conquer with the Avatar out of the way. These are people who have looked at the very concept of the Avatar and decided it is illegitimate, that a single all-powerful arbiter of balance is itself the problem, not the solution. The Avatar has gone across 10,000 years from a figure of worship to a figure whose right to exist is publicly debated by people who make a compelling case. And the newest story, from what little we can see of it, seems to take that arc to its endpoint. The world of Pavi has been described as one where the Avatar is no longer revered at all, where she is closer to hunted than honored, and I want to be careful because that show has not aired and I am reading tea leaves. But if it is even roughly true, then it completes the drift with brutal symmetry. The role that began in Szeto's and Yangchen's ages, wrapped in festivals and holy days, ends up in Pavi's as a thing to be feared and pursued. 10,000 years to go from the person a whole nation celebrates to the person who has to hide. I think there is something profound in that, and it is not just cynicism about a fickle world. It is, in a way, the natural life cycle of any institution that concentrates too much power in one person. At the beginning, when the world was raw and dangerous and full of spirits, a single figure who could hold the balance was a miracle, and people worshipped the miracle. But as the world grew, as nations organized, as ordinary people gained their own kinds of power and their own voices, the idea of one person standing above all of it, arbiter of everything, started to look less like salvation and more like a problem, an anachronism, a king in a world learning to live without kings. The Avatar's declining reverence is really the world growing up around the Avatar, outgrowing the need for a single savior, and beginning to wonder whether the savior was ever entitled to the role in the first place. That is an uncomfortable thing for a hero franchise to say about its own hero, and the fact that Avatar keeps saying it, keeps letting its villains land real hits on the legitimacy of the whole idea, is a large part of why these stories have aged so well. They never quite let you worship the Avatar the way Szeto's era did. They keep asking whether the world still needs one. And they never fully answer, and each new Avatar inherits a little less certainty than the last. Something else changes across the eras of the Avatars, unremarked, in the background of all these lives, and it is the elements themselves, or rather what people learn to do with them. Bending is not a fixed set of 4 powers handed down unchanged from Wan's day. It keeps evolving. New and stranger and often darker subarts keep being invented across the centuries, and the striking thing, when you look at who invents them, is that it is almost never the Avatar. The Avatar inherits these new powers, has to learn them, has to reckon with them, But the innovation itself tends to happen at the margins, among individual benders pushing their element somewhere no one had taken it before, which means every avatar is born into a world whose arsenal is a little larger and a little more dangerous than the one their predecessor knew. Take metal bending, because it is the one this channel has gotten wrong before, and I want to set it down correctly, plainly, once and for all. Metal bending was invented by Toph Beifong, the blind earthbending prodigy from Aang's era. And she did not invent it in some offhand moment or in the back of anyone's cart, whatever you may have heard. She invented it under the worst possible pressure, imprisoned, locked inside a metal box, a cage, by bounty hunters who had been hired to capture her, and trapped in that metal with no earth to bend. She reached for the tiny impurities still left inside the refined metal, the traces of earth that had never been fully purged from it, and she bent those. She clawed her way out of a metal prison by finding the sliver of earth hidden inside metal itself. And in doing so, she created an art that reshapes the world of Korra's era completely, where whole cities are held up by metal-bending police and metal is as workable as stone. One furious, brilliant girl in a cage invented a discipline that outlived her by generations. That is the correct story, and it is a far better one than the version people sometimes tell. Then there is lava bending, the art of turning solid earth to molten rock and back, and this one connects directly to the named avatars in a way the others do not. In Korra's time, it belongs to a member of the Red Lotus named Gazan, who wields it terrifyingly. But the ability is not new to him, because the avatars themselves have reached for it, and specifically both Roku and Kyoshi could bend lava. It makes sense when you think about it, an avatar who can bend both earth and fire sitting at the exact seam where the two meet, at melting rock. And it is a small thrill to realize that when Roku raised magma out of that volcano in the first book of The Last Airbender, borrowing Aang's body, he was doing something close to a signature of his own. The strongest benders in the world found the place where their elements overlapped, and the avatar, able to bend all four, sits at every one of those seams at once. Combustion bending is the fire sub-art, the ability to concentrate energy into a point and detonate it at a distance, a power that in the shows belongs to frightening figures on the edges, the silent assassin fans call Combustion Man in Aang's era, and a woman named Pali in Korra's, and we have already seen it reach back into Yangchen's time as the terror inside that weapon called unanimity. So combustion bending is one of the older dark arts, a recurring nightmare across eras. The closest this world comes to an artillery shell fired from a person's mind, and each time it appears, it is in the hands of someone the avatar of that day has to stop. And then there is the darkest one, blood bending, the art of bending the water inside a living body, of seizing a person's limbs and moving them like a puppet against their will. And its origin is one of the bleakest stories in the whole franchise. It was invented by a woman named Hama, a waterbender of the Southern Water Tribe, imprisoned by the Fire Nation, who in her captivity discovered she could bend the water inside the rats and then inside the guards and turned it into a weapon of escape and revenge. Bloodbending normally requires the full moon when a waterbender's power is at its peak, and it was so monstrous that it was eventually outlawed outright. But a rare few grew strong enough to do it without the moon at all, and that short list is a roll call of Korra-era horror, Yakone and his sons, one of whom, Tarlok, and the other, Noatak, became Amun, the masked revolutionary who terrorized Korra's first book by seeming to strip people of their bending. The most feared power in Korra's world traces straight back to one woman suffering in a Fire Nation prison during Aang's war, which is a very Avatar way for a power to come into being, born from cruelty, passed down through people who used it for worse. Spirit bending is the newest and rarest, the ability to affect and purify or corrupt spirits directly, and in Korra's story it belongs most notably to her uncle Unalaq, who used it in service of freeing Vaatu, twisting a healing art toward the darkest possible end. And of course there is energy bending itself, the oldest art of all, the lion turtle's original power to bend the energy within a person, thought lost for 10,000 years. Until the last lion turtle gave it back to Aang, and I will not walk through it again because we have already followed it from Wan's beginning to Ozai's defeat. But notice the shape of the whole collection when you lay it out. metal bending from a girl in a cage, blood bending from a prisoner's revenge, combustion bending in the hands of assassins, lava bending at the seam between earth and fire. The world's bending keeps evolving, and it evolves mostly in the direction of new ways to hurt people, invented by individuals under pressure at the edges of society. And the Avatar's job, life after life, is to be the one person expected to master or match or stop every new terrible thing the rest of the world dreams up. The elements Wan gathered from the lion turtles were simple. What 10,000 years of desperate, clever, wounded people made of them was not, and every Avatar inherits the whole growing pile. There is one more layer worth peeling back before we close, and it is a strange one, because it is about the fact that these Avatars do not live in a single story at all. They live across a scatter of different tellings, an animated series here, a set of comics there, a run of novels, a tabletop role-playing game, a live-action remake, and the versions do not always agree with each other. The named Avatars are not fixed portraits. They are characters who get repainted every time a new project reaches back for them. And part of being an honest guide to them is admitting that the answer to who is this Avatar sometimes depends on which shelf you're standing in front of. The clearest single example is Kuruk, the carefree hunter we spent so long with earlier, because he has now been told at least 3 different ways. In the animated series, he is a brief, wistful past life, the man who lost Umi to Ko. In the novels, he is deepened into the tragic secret spirit hunter, the man whose easy charm hid soul-deep wounds, and that version is the richest and the one most fans now think of as definitive. But the Netflix live-action remake reworked him again into a darker figure, more openly corrupted by his contact with the spirit world, harder and grimmer than the animated or novel versions, and I raise this not to argue about which is best, but to point out that the live-action Kuruk is a wholly different character wearing the same name. If you watched only the remake and only the novels, you would come away with 2 meaningfully different men. Neither is wrong exactly, they are separate interpretations, and the wise thing is to hold the animated and novel canon as the primary one and treat the live action as its own parallel telling rather than an update that overwrites the others. And this is not only a live action problem, it is baked into how this whole franchise grew. Remember that most of what we know about the older Avatars did not exist when the original series aired. Kyoshi was a single dramatic episode and a legend before FC. Yi's novels, written with one of the show's own creators, reached back and built her a whole life, an origin of poverty and betrayal, a bisexual romance, a false Avatar friend. Szeto was a name attached to a festival before the books gave him his bureaucrat story. Every one of these expansions is a reinterpretation, a filling in of blanks that were once just blanks, and each one had the power to change how you read the brief glimpses the original episodes gave us. The Kyoshi you meet in Avatar Day, standing trial by proxy for Chin's death, hits completely differently once you have read the novels and know the orphan she was and the outlaws who raised her. The text on the screen did not change. What changed is everything that got written around it afterward. I think there is something rather lovely about that, and also something that asks for a little humility from anyone, me included, who tries to tell you the definitive story of these lives. The named Avatars are living documents. They are still being written. A character who is a footnote today can become the center of a beloved novel tomorrow, and a detail you were sure of can be recontextualized by a book that has not come out yet. The Avatar cycle is not just an in-universe reservoir of forgotten lives, it is a real-world reservoir the creators keep returning to. And every return has the power to revise. So when I tell you Kuruk was really a tragic hero and not a slacker, I am telling you the version the deepest current canon supports, while being honest that another adaptation already tells it differently and a future one might again. That is not a weakness in the storytelling, it is a sign of how deep the well is. Most fictional worlds run dry when you interrogate them. This one gets richer and stranger and occasionally contradicts itself, precisely because so many hands keep reaching back into that long line of silhouettes and pulling faces forward, each in their own light. There is a question the cycle invites, once you know the order of it, and I find it oddly fun to turn over in the dark. Does the element shape the avatar, or does the avatar just happen to be born into it? Because the cycle runs in a fixed rhythm, fire, then air, then water, then earth, And around again, the same order Wan first gathered the elements in, and it maps onto the seasons too. Fire for summer, air for autumn, water for winter, earth for spring. So each avatar is born into a nation with a whole temperament attached to it, a set of ideas about how a person of that element is supposed to be. And one of the sharpest ways to read the name avatars is to ask whether they lived up to their element stereotype or spent their whole life fighting it. The air nomads are supposed to be detached, gentle, free, unattached to the world. And look at what the two air avatars we know actually did with that. Yangchen, the air avatar, became the least detached, most worldly, most politically entangled avatar of the whole cycle, a spy master and a deal maker who explicitly rejected the detachment her people prized, who told Aang to his face that the avatar can never afford it. She is air in origin and the opposite of air in practice. And then Aang, the other air avatar we know well, went the other way. He leaned into the gentleness his upbringing gave him, refused to abandon it even when every past life told him to, and found a way to win the war without breaking the very air nomad principle that all life is sacred. So the same element produced one avatar who defied its temperament completely and one who defended it to the end, which tells you the element is not destiny. It is a starting point, an inheritance you can accept or refuse. Water is supposed to be adaptable, flowing, going with the current, and here the pattern gets almost cruel in its irony. Kuruk, the water avatar, was famous precisely for going with the flow, the carefree, easygoing man, water taken to its laziest extreme, except that we know that reputation was a mask over a man being torn apart by a secret war. So his apparent embodiment of his element was itself a performance, a lie the world believed. And Korra, the other water avatar, is maybe the least watery person imaginable at the start of her story. Rigid, forceful, headstrong, someone who solves problems by hitting them, who could bend water and earth and fire as a small child but could not for years manage air, the element of the openness she lacked. Korra spends her whole series learning to be adaptable, learning to bend and flow rather than break, which is to say she spends it learning to actually become her own element. Water did not make her flexible, it set her the lifelong task of becoming so. Earth is supposed to be strong, stubborn, immovable, and Kyoshi is the one named avatar who fits her element almost perfectly, an immovable will unmatched in the whole cycle, the woman who would not launder her conscience, who took full responsibility for a warlord's death, who built institutions meant to outlast her by centuries and did. Kyoshi is Earth all the way down, and it is fitting that her signature act was quite literally moving the Earth, tearing an island off a continent. If any avatar was made by their element rather than in spite of it, it is her. And fire, the element of passion and drive, gave us Roku, whose great flaw was a certain slowness to act against a friend he loved, and Szeto, who redirected all that fire into ledgers and policy, and Wan, whose entire story began with fire stolen and refused. Fire in this world is not just aggression, it is desire, the wanting of something badly enough to break the rules for it, and you can see that thread running from Wan's theft through Roku's doomed loyalty to Szeto's fierce, patient determination to save a nation from itself. So my honest answer to the question is that the element is a costume the soul is handed at birth, and the interesting thing is never the costume, it is what each person does inside it. The cycle keeps its rhythm, fire, air, water, earth, the same order for 10,000 years, but the spirit that passes through those nations is the same spirit each time, Ra'ava's light bound to a human soul. And that soul does not become gentle because it is born to air or stubborn because it is born to earth. It arrives as itself and then either wears the element like a glove or struggles against it like a cage. Yangchen fought her air, Aang embraced it, Korra had to grow into her water. Kyoshi was born already made of her earth. And that variety, across only the handful we know, hints at how much variety must be hidden in the 200 we do not, every element having produced its saints and its rebels and its tragedies. The same 4 costumes worn 10,000 different ways by the same wandering light. We keep circling the avatar state without ever quite stopping to look straight at it. And it deserves a moment of its own because it is the mechanic that matters more than any other in this whole cosmology, and also, once you understand Korra's story, one of the quietly saddest. The avatar state is the thing that makes the avatar in the deepest sense. When it activates, the eyes light up, the tattoos glow on the ones who have them, and the avatar becomes, for that stretch of time, a channel for the accumulated power and skill and knowledge of every past life at once, all of them pouring through a single body. It is the whole line, that endless procession of silhouettes we opened with, briefly present and lending their strength to the one who is currently alive. That is why an avatar in the state can do things no single bender ever could, why Kyoshi could split a peninsula and Roku could raise magma. It is not one person's power, it is thousands. And normally, it is not something the avatar chooses. In its raw form, the avatar state is a defense mechanism, involuntary, triggered by mortal danger or overwhelming emotion, the body reaching past the person to draw on the whole line when the person alone is not enough to survive. That is what happened to Aang as a frightened boy in the storm, the state activating on its own to freeze him safe in the ice. It is a reflex before it is a tool. And a large part of what it means to master being the avatar, the thing Aang and Korra both had to learn, is gaining the ability to enter it deliberately, at will, to reach for that power on purpose rather than only having it seize you in a crisis. The untrained avatar is ridden by the state, the master rides it, but it comes with that terrible string attached that we have already named, so I will only touch it. The fact that killing the avatar while they are in the state ends the whole cycle because all the past lives are present and channeled. And to cut the avatar down then is to cut all of them at once. So the very thing that makes the avatar most powerful also makes them most vulnerable. And every enemy clever enough to understand that aims for exactly that window. The avatar state is strength and exposure in the same breath, the moment of greatest power and greatest danger fused into one glowing instant. Now here's the part that I think gets missed even by people who know the severance happened, and it is a remarkably precise and heartbreaking piece of canon. When Korra lost her connection to her past lives, she did not lose the avatar state. Those are two different things, and the distinction matters enormously. Rava was destroyed and then reformed, rebuilt from a fragment of light still inside Korra, and because Rava is the source of the avatar state, once Rava was whole again, Korra could still enter it, still glow, still draw on that deep well of power. She uses it in the later books. The state itself survived. What did not survive was the communion, the ability to speak with the individual past lives, to sit down with Aang or Roku or Kyoshi and ask them what to do. So Korra was left with a strange, hollowed version of the very thing that defines the avatar. She still had the power of the state, the raw channel, but the voices were gone. She could draw on the line without being able to talk to anyone in it. Think for a moment about how lonely that actually is. Every avatar before her, in the avatar state or in quiet meditation, had access to a council, thousands of years of predecessors who had faced their own versions of every problem and could offer guidance, a continuous conversation across death itself. When Aang did not know whether he could kill Ozai, he asked 4 of them, and they answered. Korra, after the severance, can still summon the power of all those lives, but she can no longer hear a single one of them speak. It is like inheriting a library where every book has gone blank, but the shelves still hold up the roof. The strength remained, the wisdom, the company, the sense of not being alone in the role that was taken and never given back. And she still had to keep being the avatar, still had to face Zahir and Kuvira and her own broken body, drawing on the power of a line she could no longer consult. I think that is the tragedy fans most underrate in the whole franchise, more than any death, because it is permanent, and it is quiet, and it changes the fundamental nature of the role from Korra forward. The avatar was always defined as a single person carrying the many, the one who was never truly alone because all the others were always there. And now, for Korra and for Pavi and for everyone who comes after, that is simply not true anymore. They carry the power of the many and the loneliness of the one. The glowing eyes still mean the whole line is lending its strength. They just no longer mean anyone is listening when the current avatar in the dark asks the ones before her what she is supposed to do. Fans love to argue about which avatar was the strongest, and it is a good campfire question, the kind that can fill an evening, so let me walk through it, honestly, because the answer turns out to be more interesting than any single name. The usual contenders are the obvious ones. Kyoshi, for the sheer physical scale of what she did, tearing an island off a continent and living 230 years, a wall of a person nobody could move. Aang, because he is the only avatar we know of who defeated an enemy empowered by Sozin's comet, Ozai at the absolute peak of firebending might, and beat him without killing him, which arguably takes more control than raw force. Korra, the natural prodigy, bending 3 elements before most children can read, who went on to survive 4 separate world-ending threats in the space of a few years. And Roku, whose brief possession of Aang in the first book is still one of the fiercest displays of power the show ever put on screen. People line these 4 up and try to rank them, and the ranking never settles, because there is no fair way to measure across 10,000 years and completely different circumstances. But the more I sit with the question, the more I think it is secretly the wrong one. And not for the soft reason that strength does not matter, but for a sharper reason hiding in the evidence itself. Look at when these avatars were at their most powerful, the exact moments the fans point to as proof of strength, and notice what they have in common. Kyoshi splitting the peninsula was not a triumph. It was a desperate last resort against a warlord who was about to overrun her home, an act of someone with no better option left. Aang defeating comet-powered Ozai came at the very end of a 100-year war that the Avatar had failed to prevent. A catastrophe a full century in the making that Aang inherited and had to clean up in a single day. Roku's most fearsome display came possessing another Avatar's body decades after his death, unable to act in his own life. The near-death in the Avatar state, the poison that broke Korra, these peaks of channeled power almost always arrive at the worst moments when everything else has already gone wrong. Because here's the thing the whole cosmology quietly tells you if you listen. The Avatar state, that ultimate expression of power, is fundamentally an emergency measure. It is a failure state. Its rawest form is involuntary, triggered by mortal danger, which means that by the time an Avatar is glowing and channeling the full might of the line, something has already gone badly enough that survival itself is in question. An Avatar who has to reach for that much power is, almost by definition, an Avatar who has already lost the quieter, earlier battle, the one where balance could have been kept with a word or a treaty or a well-timed intervention. The truly successful Avatars, the ones who did the job as it was meant to be done, would have had far less occasion to show off that kind of strength, because they would have solved things before they ever reached the point of needing to tear islands apart. Which is why, when you ask who the strongest Avatar was, I keep drifting away from the ones with the spectacular feats and back toward the ones the record barely remembers, toward the bureaucrat who saved a nation with ledgers and the spy master who prevented wars in back rooms, and even toward that one name, Salai, recorded as one of the greatest ever for reasons no one wrote down. Maybe the reason no one wrote down Salai's great deeds is that great deeds, in the truest sense of the Avatar's job, do not photograph well. A war prevented leaves no battlefield. A famine averted leaves no monument. An Avatar who kept the peace so completely that nothing dramatic ever happened would leave behind exactly the kind of blank, glowing reputation Salai has. Greatness with no visible cause because the cause was the absence of disaster. The strongest Avatar might be one whose power we can never point to, precisely because they used it so well that the world stayed quiet. And the ones we call strongest, the island splitters and the comet beaters, may in a sense be the ones the job had already half defeated, forced to become that mighty because the situation had already slipped that far. Strength in this world is often just the measure of how much had already gone wrong by the time it was needed. There is a question underneath all of this that the shows never quite answer out loud, and it is the strangest one of all, the kind that is better turned over slowly in the dark than argued about. Are all these avatars the same person, or are they different people? Because both answers are true at once, and the tension between them is the beating heart of the whole idea. When Aang dies and Korra is born, is that Aang living again as a girl in the Southern Water Tribe? Or is it a brand new human being who happens to inherit a spirit that Aang was also once bound to? The franchise wants you to feel both, and it never fully resolves it, and I think that ambiguity is deliberate and profound. Consider the evidence on the side of them being the same. The reincarnation is immediate and continuous, no gap. the next avatar born the very instant the last one dies. Aang, born as Roku, fell on the volcano. Korra, born as Aang, breathed his last. The same spirit, Rava, bound to each soul in turn since Wan. And the past lives can be spoken with, can advise, can even briefly take control of the current body, as Roku did with Aang, which suggests a genuine continuity of self across the deaths, a single ongoing being wearing a succession of faces. When Aang talks to Roku, it does not feel like talking to a stranger. It feels like talking to a previous chapter of yourself, an older, wiser version who happens to have died first. And yet consider the overwhelming evidence on the other side. Aang and Korra could not be more different as people. One gentle, playful, spiritual, conflict-averse, raised by monks to treasure all life. The other fierce, physical, impatient, born ready to fight. They have different families, different friends, different loves, different fears, different senses of humor. If you met them at a party, you would never guess they were in any sense the same being. Kyoshi's iron and Kuruk's carefree mask and Yangchen's calculating pragmatism are not the same personality expressed four ways. They are four entirely distinct human beings, shaped by their own upbringings and their own wounds, who share only a spirit and a job. The soul, the actual person, seems to be new each time. What passes down is something underneath personality, something more like a role and a power and a thread of memory than an identity. So which is it? This is the point where I have to be clear that I am offering an interpretation rather than a fact, because the shows really do leave this open. But the reading that satisfies me most is that the avatar is neither purely one person nor purely many, but a kind of relay of selves bound by a single continuous witness. Rava is the constant. Rava was there for all of it, fused with Wan and then carried through every life since. And in that sense, there is one being who has lived 10,000 years and remembers, in some form, all of it. But the humans, the Aangs and the Korras, are real and distinct and mortal, born fresh, living once, dying once, and then persisting as individual spirits rather than dissolving into some collective avatar over soul. The past lives Aang consults are not facets of one mind. They are the actual individual dead, Roku still himself, Kyoshi still herself, each preserved as a person, all of them connected by the thread of the spirit they took turns carrying, which makes what happened to Korra even sadder in retrospect, and it recontextualizes the severance one final way. Before her, an avatar was a person who was also, through Rava, in continuous contact with every previous holder of the role, a self that was singular in the present but plural across time, never truly cut off from the ones who came before. Korra is the first avatar in 10,000 years for whom that plurality across time was broken. She is fully a person, fully herself, but the thread back through Rava to all those other selves was severed, so she became, uniquely, an avatar who is only one person, cut loose from the relay, a single life carrying a spirit that used to remember everyone it had ever been, and now, in a sense, remembers no one. If the avatar's deepest nature was to be one and many at once, Korra was reduced to just the one, which may be the truest way to understand what she lost. Not a superpower, not a council of advisors, the very thing that made the avatar more than a single mortal life. She became, after all those millennia, simply a person again, with a great deal of power and no one behind her, and she had to decide alone whether that made her less of an avatar or in some hard-won way finally free of all of them. There is a kind of relationship the avatars have that we have barely touched, and it is one of the tenderest threads running through the whole cycle, the bond between an avatar and their animal, the companion who is not a teacher or a soldier or a love interest, but simply a creature that chose them and stayed. Almost every avatar we know well has one, and I think it is one of the wisest recurring ideas in these stories, because the animal guide is the single relationship in an avatar's life that asks nothing of them as the avatar. The world wants the avatar to save it. Nations want rulings, spirits want treaties, villains want them dead. The animal just wants to be near the person and loves the person, not the role. The bond runs right back to the beginning of airbending itself, because the sky bison, those enormous, gentle flying creatures, are regarded in this world as the very first airbenders, the ones who taught the art to the air nomads in the first place. So the relationship between an air avatar and a sky bison is older than the air nomads as a culture, a partnership that predates the humans who inherited it. Aang's bison, Appa, is not a pet in any small sense. He is the last of his kind that Aang knows, a fellow survivor of the same frozen century, the one living being from Aang's lost world who came through the ice with him. When you remember that Aang woke to find every air nomad dead, you realize Appa is not just his transport. He is the last of Aang's entire people, besides Aang himself, two survivors of a genocide keeping each other company. And Momo, the winged lemur they pick up in the ruins of an air temple, is another small piece of that vanished world, scavenged out of the emptiness. Aang's animals are the last living fragments of home. And this bond keeps recurring, and it keeps breaking hearts. Yangchen, the great pragmatic spy master, air avatar, had her own sky bison, Nujian, and the novels put real weight on the grief when she loses that bison. Because even an avatar as hardened and calculating as Yangchen, a woman who traded in secrets and cut deals with corrupt merchants without flinching, is undone by the loss of the creature that carried her. It is one of the few things that cracks her. Roku had a dragon, Fang, and when Roku lay dying in the poison gas of his own island's volcano, abandoned by the friend who should have saved him, Fang did not leave. The dragon stayed with him and died beside him rather than fly to safety. That is the loyalty the story keeps handing these animals, a loyalty that outlasts even the humans. Because Sozin, the person, walked away, and Fang, the beast, stayed to the end. And Korra, the avatar cut off from all her past lives, the one left most alone, had Naga, a polar bear dog she found as a girl during a storm, separated from her pack and tamed with nothing but patience and a scrap of dried fish. Naga was the first of her kind ever successfully tamed, undyingly loyal, Korra's best friend before Korra had any of the human friends her series gives her. Notice what that means for Korra especially. When the severance took her past lives, when she could no longer speak to a single avatar who came before her, she was not entirely alone because the loyalty of an animal does not run through Rava and cannot be severed by any spirit of chaos. Naga did not care that the connection to 10,000 years of predecessors was gone. Naga simply stayed, the way Appa stayed with the last airbender, the way Fang stayed with the dying Roku, the way these creatures always seem to stay. And I find real comfort in that, at the end of a night spent on all the ways the avatar's role isolates them and costs them and sets the whole world's weight on their shoulders. Whatever else the avatar loses, the past lives, the reverence, the person they loved, there tends to be, curled up somewhere nearby, a large loyal animal who has no idea any of them are the avatar and would not care if they knew, who is simply glad they came home. Of all the relationships in these stories, that might be the only one the role cannot poison, and it is fitting that it is the one that asks for nothing but presence. One more thing hides in the gaps between these lives, and it is the machinery that catches the spirit each time it falls, the human infrastructure built up over centuries to find, confirm, train, and guard each new avatar. Because the cycle does not run itself, not on the human side. When an avatar dies and the spirit passes to a newborn somewhere in the next nation, that child does not arrive with a label. Someone has to find them out of all the children born in the right nation at the right time, and the way that search works is one of the loveliest small details of this world. The traditional method is to present a candidate with a spread of objects, most of them ordinary, a few of them relics that belong to past avatars. And the true avatar, without being told, without knowing why, reaches for the ones that were once theirs. The soul recognizes its own former possessions. That is how Aang was identified as a small boy, drawn to 4 toys out of thousands. And it is a lovely idea that the continuity of the avatar is something a child feels in their hands before they can possibly understand it. And then there are the people. Across the eras, sages and monks and orders take on the work of raising and protecting the one who carries the spirit. And it is not always done well or kindly. We saw the dark version in Kyoshi's story, the sage Jianzhu and the others who searched for Kuruk's successor, and got it catastrophically wrong, crowning the false avatar Yun and nearly destroying the real one, using the search for power and control rather than service. The infrastructure around the avatar can be corrupt, can be self-serving, can fail the very child it exists to protect, and the novels are honest about that, about how much damage the people meant to guide an avatar can do when they forget who they are supposed to be serving. But there is a brighter institution woven through all of it, and it reaches back further than most fans realize: the Order of the White Lotus. In The Last Airbender, it is a secret society of the wise, drawn from all 4 nations, devoted to philosophy and beauty and truth above any loyalty to a single country. And its members turn out to be some of the best loved figures in the show, the old ones who quietly shape events from the margins. Aang's various masters and mentors, with Iroh as its most famous face. And that same order appears far earlier, back in Yangchen's era, hundreds of years before Aang, which tells you it is not a small thing, but a long, patient thread running through the centuries. A network of people committed to the balance the avatar represents, even across the generations when there is no avatar available to consult. By Korra's time, the White Lotus has become something more formal, an order that took on the direct duty of guarding and training the young avatar, watching over Korra as a child in a walled compound in the south. I think this is worth ending our tour of the connective tissue on, because it reframes the loneliness we have talked about so much. Yes, the avatar is isolated by the role, cut off after Korra from their own past selves, set above and apart from everyone by a power no one else has. But the avatar is never quite as alone as all that, because around every single one of them, named and unnamed, there was always a human structure, imperfect and sometimes corrupt, but usually devoted, of people who gave their lives to finding the next avatar, to teaching the elements, to guarding the child until the child could guard the world. For 10,000 years, alongside that long line of avatars, there ran a second, invisible line of ordinary people, sages and masters and White Lotus members and loyal friends, who never carried the spirit themselves but spent their whole lives in service to whoever did. The avatar gets the statues. But the cycle was carried just as much by the countless nameless people who kept catching the spirit and raising it and handing it forward, generation after generation, so that the light never once hit the ground. Before we close, sit for a moment with the plainest fact that binds every one of them, the one thing that is true of Wan and Kyoshi and Aang and every silhouette in the line alike. They all died, for all the power, all the reverence, all the ability to reshape continents and negotiate with gods. The avatar is mortal every single time, and the ages at which they died tell their own quiet story about what the job does to the people who hold it. Line the numbers up, and they are startling in their range. Kyoshi lived to 230, the oldest confirmed human the franchise has ever shown. Kuruk died at 33, the youngest we know, worn to nothing by a secret war against dark spirits. Roku died around 70, choking on volcanic gas his oldest friend refused to save him from. Aang died at 66, which is not old, not for the weight he carried and the century he lost frozen in the ice. And Wan, the first, died visibly aged, but with no number the show will give us. An old man apologizing to the spirit bound to his soul. What strikes me about those deaths is how few of them are peaceful, and how none of them are ever truly endings. Kuruk did not die of old age, he died of the cost of his own duty, drained early by the thing he did in secret to protect everyone else. Roku did not die in his sleep, he died betrayed, abandoned mid-rescue by the person he had loved longest, and that death lit the fuse on a 100-year war. Wan died in failure by his own reckoning, still unable to make humans stop fighting each other. And even Kyoshi's astonishing 230 years reads less like a blessing than like a very long sentence. An avatar who had to watch generation after generation of everyone she knew grow old and die while she kept going, propped up by techniques she took from an immortal assassin. Long life or short, the avatar rarely gets an easy exit because the role does not let go of you gently. And here's the thing that makes the avatar's death different from anyone else's in this world. The thing that has been humming under everything we have said tonight. For every other person, death is an ending. For the avatar, death is a birth. The instant an avatar dies, the next one begins. No gap, no pause. The spirit already falling into a new life somewhere in the next nation before the last body has gone cold. Aang was born as Roku died on the volcano. Korra was born as Aang died an old man. The Avatar is the one being in the world who never actually gets to end, who is denied even the finality of death because their death is immediately, mechanically, the start of someone else. There is something both beautiful and a little merciless in that. A normal person dies and is mourned and is, in time, at rest. The Avatar dies and is instantly back on duty in a new body that will have to learn everything from scratch, carry the same weight, and one day die into yet another. The cycle is a promise that the light will never go out, and it is kept, but it is kept at the cost of ever letting the light simply rest. So when we say Wan died and the cycle began, and Aang died and Korra was born, and one day Korra will die and Pavi will fully arrive, we are describing the same event 10,000 times over. A death that is a handoff, a life that is a continuation, a soul that is denied the ordinary human mercy of a final ending in exchange for the extraordinary gift of never being truly gone. Every Avatar in that long line paid that price. They gave up their ending so the world would never be without one of them. And that, more than the bending, more than the Avatar state, more than any single deed, is what it actually costs to be the Avatar. Not just to give your life to the world, but to give up death itself as anything other than a doorway to the next life of service. There is a last idea I want to leave you with before we drift toward the end, and it only becomes visible once you have the whole line in view, from the very first name to the most recent. The entire known history of the Avatar, all 10,000 years of it, turns out to be shaped like a single question asked at the start and answered, at last, at the finish. And the question is whether Wan was right. Because remember what the first Avatar actually did. Faced with a world where humans and spirits shared the same ground and suffered for it, Wan's great founding act was separation. He sealed the two worlds apart, closed the portals, sent the spirits home, and built the Avatar's whole purpose around keeping that division intact, guarding the wall between the human and the spirit worlds for as long as the cycle lasted. Every Avatar after him inherited that job, the bridge between two worlds whose real task was to make sure the two worlds stayed on their own sides of the bridge. And then 10,000 years later, the newest Avatar we know looked at that ancient founding decision and decided it was finished. Korra reopened the portals. She undid deliberately the very first thing the Avatar was created to do, and let the spirits back into the human world for good. So the whole arc of the named Avatars, from the one who closed the worlds to the one who opened them, is really the story of a single decision being made, and then, after 100 centuries, unmade. Which leaves the question hanging in a way I find genuinely haunting. Was Wan wrong? Was the separation a mistake that took 10,000 years to correct? Or was it the necessary shelter of a world too young and too fragile to survive contact with the spirits? A wall that had to stand until humanity grew up enough to take it down safely. The stories do not tell you. They just let the beginning and the end look at each other across all that time. I lean, honestly, toward the gentler reading, that neither of them was wrong, that Wan built a wall the world needed then, and Korra took it down when the world could finally do without it, and that the whole long line of Avatars in between was the slow work of getting humanity ready to live beside the spirits again as equals rather than as prey. But I hold that loosely because the beauty of it is that the franchise refuses to settle it. And every Avatar in that line, everyone we named tonight, and every silhouette we could not, was part of the journey from the closing to the opening, whether they knew it or not. Szeto balancing a nation's books, and Yangchen cutting her deals, and Kyoshi splitting her island, and Kuruk hunting his dark spirits, and Roku guarding the old separations, and Aang refusing to kill all of it, all of them, were carrying the world one lifetime further along the road from the wall Wan built to the door Korra opened. The cycle was not just a chain of heroes, it was a single 10,000-year-long change of mind. And we got to watch the last few steps of it. And so we come back up out of that long line, out of the 10,000 years, to where you are right now, warm and still, and hopefully most of the way to sleep. It is worth remembering as we go that all of this came from a children's animated series that a lot of people once dismissed, a show about a boy in an iceberg that turned out to be as carefully built a fictional world as anyone has made, deep enough that you can spend 2 hours simply walking the list of its reincarnations and still leave 200 lives unexplored in the dark. That is a rare and quietly wonderful thing. Most stories give you a hero and an ending. Avatar gave you a cycle, a whole civilization of heroes stretching back further than memory, and then had the confidence to name only a handful of them and let the rest stay mysterious, trusting you to feel the weight of everyone it left unnamed. I think that is why these stories have lasted, why people keep coming back to them long after they have supposedly outgrown cartoons, because underneath the bending and the battles is a properly grown-up idea that no single life, however powerful, ever finishes the work, that the best any of us can do is carry it a little further and hand it on. Wan started something he could not complete and passed it forward. Every avatar after him did the same, all the way down to Korra, all the way to Pavi waiting in the dark, and one day to whoever comes after her, on and on, a light handed from hand to hand for as long as the world needs holding together. There is something in that worth falling asleep to, the thought that the work does not depend on any one of us finishing it, that it was always meant to be carried in relay, and that somewhere in that long, dim line there is room for the small parts each of us plays too. So rest now, let the whole line of them fade back into the shadow they came out of, Wan and Yangchen and Kyoshi and Roku and Aang and Korra and all the nameless others, still standing there, still carrying it, whether or not anyone is awake to watch. You do not have to hold anything up tonight. That is somebody else's job, and they have been doing it for 10,000 years, and they will still be doing it in the morning. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.